this guy's recording. This guy's working. I'll do this thing where I go, so that I can synchronize the two.
Cool.
All right. Welcome. So for real, I actually have never done a podcast like this that at least pretends to be professional looking. So it does increase the amount of that kind of. I have no experience actually doing this in a professional context. So anyway, I'm not even going to bother doing that. But welcome back. I don't know what the name of the podcast is.
You said Could Be Wrong podcast? I'm pretty cool with that.
I feel like it's weird calling it Could Be Wrong on a podcast where you don't plan to talk about things that are that controversial. If we're going to talk about like gender and actually controversial things, it feels more appropriate. But nonetheless, I can't think of anything else at the moment. So welcome back to the Could Be Wrong podcast. I'm here with Matt Farrugia, my longtime friend, who I suppose you should probably. I'll give you a bit of a spiel. So Matt is doing what are you doing at Melbourne Uni?
I'm working now as a research assistant and teaching assistant.
He's working as a research assistant and a teaching assistant at Melbourne Uni, and you definitely got ducks at our high school. So that's an important thing to make very clear. I did not get it myself, unfortunately.
It was close.
It was a close call. But yes. So the reason I brought you on my podcast, Matt, is to talk about artificial intelligence, because that's a big interest of yours, and it's where you want to actually go into. I don't know if you want to spend your entire career in that field, but
yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I guess I see myself able to contribute to the field now, but things may change in the future, and it's difficult to switch fields because there's like a opportunity cost when you're kind of refamiliarizing yourself with the new field. But if ever that opportunity cost makes sense to pay, then yeah, I guess I would switch. But yeah.
Okay, so tell us about what you're currently doing in the field of AI.
Yeah, okay. So my current job is that I'm a research assistant working on explainable AI with a lab at the University of Melbourne. Explainable AI is basically the science of trying to build into machine learning systems that can make really good predictions, additional capabilities whereby they can accompany their predictions with an explanation that helps someone receiving the prediction, you would hope, understand either why the model made the prediction or what would have caused it to make a different prediction. And there's a bunch of benefits or sort of applications of that we can talk about. I'm also working as a teaching assistant in a class at the university called The Ethics of Artificial Intelligence. This is a course for master's students. They take this class, and there are sort of lectures on a little bit of moral philosophy, a little bit of sort of I don't know if I want to call it political science or something, or just AI governance, where we talk about different regulations that are sort of being developed to try and smooth some of the rough impacts from AI in the sort of modern day. And also we sort of just talk about various conceptual topics in AI ethics, like fairness and transparency and what's the value of those. And so the master students who are doing the various programs in AI technology, like engineering or data science degrees or whatever, they can take this as an elective. The students seem to be taking it because they think it's really important to, it's obviously all around us that there's this sort of pressure to make these AI systems have better impacts in the world. And they see that, and then they're like, I'll take that subject. So I'm part of the teaching team. So I'm not lecturing or anything, but I just run basically discussion tutorials where the students come in and they're in groups, and we have some discussion questions for them to talk about. And they're going to write some essays eventually on probably moral philosophy topics. Yeah.
So when people are learning about moral philosophy, but in the context of AI, to me, moral philosophy is fairly general. So if you learn what a bunch of moral philosophers have said about ethics and utilitarianism versus deontology and stuff like that, you get a pretty good picture of like what the landscape is. I want to know, when it comes to AI, is there a very small subset of that actually is like really crucial, or is it really just like the whole thing could be relevant because we're still yet to know what is going to be more relevant over time?
Yeah, good question. So I think the background of students coming into this subject is that they probably don't have any philosophical sort of formal training in philosophy and moral philosophy. So they might be hearing about, they might have heard of utilitarianism, but they might not have heard of deontology or virtue ethics. Another framework we look at is the sort of feminist ethics framework called the ethics of care. So they might not have heard about these. So this might be their first exposure to any of those broad ideas. And the examples that we look at are then drawn from applications of technology. Like, for example, we might spend a class discussing the implications in terms of ethical frameworks. We might use that to analyze the decision to use, this was something from a couple of years ago when we were in COVID, facial recognition technology, or sort of like computer vision technology in a workplace, surveilling workers and then detecting if they violate like social distancing regulations and then pulling them up on it. So you can imagine that raises issues around privacy and like false positives. We'd have that kind of discussion, and we try and ground it in moral philosophy would be the way that we try and ground that discussion, so that we're not just I mean, these discussions kind of, you say, well, why is that bad or good or whatever, and we're trying to give them the frameworks of moral philosophy to be able to substantiate those kind of claims, rather than just saying that doesn't seem right to me or something like that.
Yes, that's a question that I find very interesting. I think that that doesn't feel right to me is not that bad of an argument, personally, in the sense that if I'm say privacy, right? I remember having an argument with someone who was basically saying, like, is it that bad if we end up in a surveillance state? Like, if you have nothing to really worry about because the police are coming, checking up on you, and like the specific example was like, I love saying controversial things in private messages because I find it funny. And I'll say things that are just like, pretend to be a mass murderer type person or something like that, just because it's funny. We all know we're not actually mass murderers, but it's just like, just making shit up. And she was saying, well, in this proposed society, somebody might, from the government, look at those messages and just say, hey, just checking in, do you actually plan on doing any mass murdering soon? And I'd be like, do you mind? Like, this is a private conversation. I'm not cool with you, looking at that. And she was like, yeah, but if you're not actually planning on mass murdering anyone, then what's the problem? Like, you can just set the record straight. And I was like, I just don't want my messages to be looked at by some random guy working at the government. And this ties into the whole, like, it just doesn't feel great, right? It's like, well, what's the actual basis for that? I think when it comes to... I think there are certain things where humans are allowed to just be like, that doesn't feel great to me, and I'm not going to think any deeper about that. But if it's the case that everyone feels that kind of awkward, uneasy feeling, then you can ground it in utilitarianism. And you can say, well, if everyone kind of hates having their privacy violated, then we should probably care about that thing, because it sounds like it's making people's lives worse when you violate privacy. And obviously you can say, well, maybe it's a cultural thing that you can change, and therefore there wouldn't be the suffering because people would have a new way of looking at things. So that was a very long diatribe about...
Yeah, you touched on a lot there.
Yeah.
Let me see. So, I'm also from a technical background. So I don't have a formal training in philosophy beyond what I've kind of learned, moral philosophy, beyond what I've kind of learned as preparation for teaching this subject. My understanding is sort of... this is a little bit beyond the edge of my understanding, but I think that essentially frameworks like deontology and utilitarianism are basically some guy, in this case Kant or Bentham, coming along and saying, hey, it just, like, this principle just seems right to me. Like, maybe they're drawing on moral intuitions. I'm not sure that you can ground it in something more secure than that. But also, like, I know there's basically a field of meta-ethics that tries to look into questions about, whether there's moral truths in the universe and whether you're actually drawing on that, or whether it's something more subjective. And people talk about moral relativism, which is the idea, one version of it is the idea that different societies can consider different things to be right, and they can be correct about that because it is relative to the society you live in. And there are sort of naive versions of this that philosophers kind of dismiss as just like, well, it's not just whatever you say goes, but there are then more sophisticated versions of this that are considered seriously by philosophers as a potential sort of like potentially true. But yeah, like I said, that's something that's like on my radar to look into next, rather than something I'm comfortable with already. Let me see. In terms of privacy, I mean, this was just an example, but my reaction to your example is something like, first of all, it could be an issue if the people in the government who see you doing this don't come and say, hey, are you just joking around, just checking in? They might just lock you away. Yeah.
And then I really have a bone to pick. I'm like, maybe I'll become a mass murderer if you let me out.
The other thing is that I wonder if, so some of the risks from AI, like how AI impacts the privacy landscape, is that you can automate the surveillance. So it might not, at the end of the day, actually be a person looking into your private conversations. I wonder if you'd feel the same way about that. Like, what would your moral intuitions be if it was instead large language model reading through your chats and classifying instances of like problematic behavior or something like that? I wonder.
A good question.
Eventually, probably it's going to come to someone, unless an AI system is also the one in charge of this whole regime, which is a bit more speculative, sort of far future sci-fi scenario, but possible. Maybe it's going to come to a person, and then if a red flag is raised by the algorithm, it's going to eventually propagate to a person who will then see your private conversation. So maybe it's like there's people in the loop, but yeah.
I suppose then, well, there's a couple things there. So first of all, would you trust an AI or a human to be better at perceiving context? I know that even with humans currently doing like moderation and stuff on Facebook, actually Tinder would be a better example, because it's probably one of those places where there's a lot of humor going around intentionally, because guys try to make like funny pickup lines, and but there's also a much greater safety concern, right? Because you're interacting with strangers of the opposite sex most of the time.
What's the Tinder like moderation system like? I
have no idea. I just assume that someone can report you, and then someone will review the message.
Okay, so then users are kind of flagging content. So
I think so. I don't think they're looking through messages without being reported.
Sorry, yeah. If you give a person your corny pickup line, have you kind of consented for them to read it, judge it, and potentially report it? Right?
Yeah, pretty much.
That's a little bit different from privacy. I mean, you've shown them the message, and it was intended for them to read. So
yes,
maybe not for someone else to read, but you also signed the Tinder privacy policy.
That is true. I'm thinking more about just in terms of the moderation question. You have to have some person looking at something and saying, "Is this guy a bad guy, or is this something that we should be taking down, or something like that?"
Yeah,
pulling this guy out of the system, like banning their Twitter account, for example.
Yes.
And so my understanding is that it's already like a known thing among these moderators that context is very important, and that in some subculture people might say certain things just as a joke, which to the untrained eye looks very menacing. And so I wonder if AI, it sounds to me like it would be maybe harder for AI than for a human at the moment to be able to read between the lines and understand context. But for all I know, they could do just as good a job. I think, bringing it back to privacy, whether it's an AI or whether it's a human, the fact that it can eventually get back to a human, or maybe if it was the speculative future where it's an AI controlling the whole thing, just knowing that you're going to be judged for something that you said privately by some random person that the message wasn't intended for, I think that bothers people.
Yeah.
And I think that arguably they're right to be bothered by that, and that's like the principle. But there's also a practical question of, okay, let's say we now live in this world where you actually know that people are looking through all of your messages to see if there's anything sketchy happening there. Okay, what reaction do you have as someone who likes saying hilarious, controversial things? You're probably just going to use it less, right?
Yeah.
So I know, for example, should I use this example? I know, for example, when you go from Slack to Microsoft Teams, if you're a hypothetical person who used to be on Slack and your work changed to Microsoft Teams, Microsoft Teams has, to my knowledge, much more ability for admins to go around and just look at everyone's messages, basically.
Interesting.
And so if you used to have like an ongoing conversation with your colleagues...
Have they also migrated that conversation across the workplace?
They didn't migrate it across, thank God. But if you...
Hypothetically.
Hypothetically. Thank God for the person who's hypothetically in that situation. If you were saying things that were critical of the leadership team, for example, and stuff like that, there are people who are just still have Slack open in a separate window, and it's kind of like just talking to the people you were talking to previously.
Okay.
still on the old work account. It's just on the free account now. So it's like, there's no, you can't see the message history, but it's like people just know that on Microsoft Teams, you don't have the same security.
Yeah.
And so the reason for me bringing that up is you bring that back to something like Facebook or Twitter, that if you know that there's this system in place that's trying to screw you over, like, you gain nothing, right? Like, maybe you gain the benefit of not being killed by a mass murderer who's in your area, who is saying some things on Facebook and ends up killing you.
Yes.
Okay, that is the case. But in general, it's kind of like, I gain nothing from this. This is purely out to get me. It's kind of like, yeah. Anyway, so people in those situations will probably just move to other platforms where you have end-to-end encrypted messaging potentially, where you know that whatever the company is, they're not going to hand over the messages to the government if they get asked for it. And you could argue that's worse, because maybe that people are spending less time on platforms that have like more mainstream views potentially, something along those lines.
Okay.
But that's just
so your position is something like, I think you've had a blog post about this in the past, something like forcing these views underground is not healthy. If there are problematic views that people have that are dangerous, forcing them underground where they then don't get exposed to the kind of corrective impulses of free discussion, and like whatever the marketplace of ideas or whatever you want to call it, is actually dangerous, because then they can kind of fester, grow, and become dangerous. Whereas if they were exposed to more critical viewpoints, they would kind of naturally be diffused.
Yep.
Yeah, that's an interesting
I think
take on
like
that.
maybe that blog post was talking more about public posts, whereas like with private messages, it's kind of hard to see how only the people in that group could maybe have an impact. But
yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Anyway, that was a very long digression. I did not intend to go into about privacy.
No, but this is interesting. I mean, I've thought a lot about privacy. If you're happy, we can keep discussing it a little bit. Yeah. So I think so far I've been kind of just neutrally discussing this, but if I want to bring my opinions into it in terms of privacy, I think it's probably quite troubling, some of these sort of scenarios that we're imagining. I think the main concern that people have, or one of the, actually I don't know if the main concern, because I haven't looked too much into this, but one concern that people bring up that I don't think we've discussed yet is that basically it's similar to what you discussed about how it could sort of change people's behavior in terms of they would go somewhere else.
Yeah.
You can imagine maybe a world where there is nowhere else, sort of the surveillance is comprehensive or not, whatever, it doesn't matter.
It's not hard. It's not that hard to imagine that,
no,
to
that's
be
right.
honest.
Yeah. So you could have this change people's behavior in their own head, sort of. Like, imagine if this sort of this feedback of, like, watch what you say in this place becomes watch what you say and sort of watch what you think.
Yeah.
And you sort of train people to you were sort of implicitly training people to change the way that they think, and you kind of close off certain avenues of like the potential future where people thought this idea and then it led to this thing. And if you do that in a certain way, some people would say, well, maybe that's bad. My intuition is that if you change it in this way, that will have bad consequences. Of course, anything you do kind of changes what the future will be, and then sometimes we think it will have bad or good consequences, and it's also hard to tell. But the intuition people have around privacy is that if you have this censorship becoming kind of ingrained and automatic in people's heads before the idea even gets thought, or certainly before it gets out, then you have changed the world, the society, in a way that it will be predictably worse. That is hard to know why it would be. That's just the intuition that people seem to have.
I share that intuition.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if I could analyze it. I guess it probably comes down to sort of just sort of like the foundation of classical liberalism, where you sort of say society progresses by people having ideas, and then good ideas end up kind of becoming a part of the society, like through some very long process of sharing them and developing them and stuff. And it's anything that kind of stops the kind of generative impulse that is sort of where these ideas come from. Anything that sort of limits that is going to be bad, because the more ideas are generated, the more good ideas are generated, or something like that. I think it's like, so how familiar are you with reinforcement learning?
I know I've heard the word before.
Okay.
Yes.
In reinforcement learning,
anyone in the future, if I ever apply for an AI-based engineering job, This is just we're just messing with each other. Obviously, I know all about AI, so
I better explain for the audience who may not have heard of.
We don't want to
reinforcement
insult
learning.
their intelligence, but maybe for anyone who might come across this video, it's probably worth doing. So I agree. Let's give it give them the spiel.
Okay, the I'm not going to go into much detail because I don't need to for this, but the basic idea of reinforcement learning is it's a paradigm of machine learning where you're building agents who can learn to interact in a sequential way with their environment in order to achieve some rewards, sort of maximize some reward signal which they accumulate over time. So you can think of a game like Mario and a reward being sort of the amount of coins you pick up, or sort of the progress through the level, or maybe even a very sparse reward signal where it's just you win the game and you get a reward.
Okay.
So rather than traditional machine learning where you're just kind of like trying to classify a picture or some other input, and you're trying to come up with an output for one input, it's kind of transactional like that, or it's independently and identically distributed inputs. In this case, in reinforcement learning, your inputs are coupled because they come in a sequence, and how you respond to the first input, which is, instead of a classification, you talk about it as an action, influences what you're going to see next.
Yep.
And so you have to kind of tweak the algorithms to kind of take this into account, this sequential nature of this task. Anyway, in reinforcement learning, when you're sort of learning to be an agent in reinforcement learning, you have this dilemma about you can exploit the current knowledge that you have of how to get reward, the sort of pathways lead to reward, or you can take actions how you don't know how they're going to turn out because you haven't done it before. You can explore, and then you potentially find more rewarding things to do.
Yep.
And this explore versus exploit trade-off, because you kind of, in any given action, it could be sort of more towards exploiting what you already know or exploring what you don't already know to find new things to exploit. This explore-exploit trade-off is a classic trade-off that shows up in reinforcement learning. And the reason I bring that up is because maybe you could draw an analogy to liberalism, because if you sort of are dampening the exploration incentive for people to sort of explore with their ideas,
right.
You would then be harming the total amount of reward that we might eventually find out how to get. So I often see through things through the sort of lens of explore versus exploit, and this is an example where I think the intuition of these classical liberals is something like, if you have censorship, that will bring exploration versus exploitation out of balance in favor of, like, away from the exploring. We should be doing more exploring or something like that. I mean, I actually think it's hard to know how much exploring we should be doing and how much leads to kind of optimal outcomes over the long term.
Because a lot of exploring probably gets you killed.
Yeah, that's right. So curiosity killed the cat kind of thing. And you can actually, I think there are some papers that look at this in a very abstract setting and formalize this like, well, what if we had an agent and we sort of are in an environment where some things, if you explore them, you will die. Like there are possible negative consequences out there. Well, if you explore, you're going to eventually run into those things and die. So it's like curiosity killed the cat, the theorem sort of thing.
Okay, so I suppose I want to also explore the thing that bothers me about this idea of the censorship state, which is that I don't actually think that it works in the sense that I don't think people actually fail to even come up with an original thought in the first place, right? If they truly failed to come up with that thought, maybe you could argue it's not that bad because they don't know what they're missing out on. They're just these drones sort of walking around being like, hey, isn't the government great?
Well, it's interesting because it depends on what you sort of think of as value. I think classical liberals would view part of value as being that process or whatever.
I agree with that. But regardless, what I'm saying is that that's not what happens. What actually happens is everyone kind of knows the government sucks and kind of hates the fact that they're in a surveillance state, but they just know they can't do anything about it and they can't organize. It's kind of like how when the communist, when the Soviet collapse happened, journalists went in there and you couldn't find a single person claiming to be a communist. And so it's like, what the hell? Everyone said they were communists all the time. So it's kind of like what's that guy's name? I forget the name. The public statements, public lies, private truth, something like that.
I'm not familiar.
Oh, damn it. The name's tip of my tongue. It's like Tim. I can't remember the guy's name. But I feel like it's a common thing when people have these beliefs and it's just like, I'm not going to say that out loud.
Yeah.
And the unease of not being able to say what you think publicly, I think is just a form of suffering that is the thing I mostly worry about when it comes to censorship. It is also true that it means you won't have good ideas being put forward, but...
Not to be a authoritarian apologist, but like I guess you then, to take a like fully holistic view of this, you then have to say, well, there's this suffering. Is there a benefit that we get from being in this kind of more cohesive state or something like that? Maybe it leads to something that outweighs that suffering. And I think the classical liberal intuition would be, well, it doesn't, so you're wrong, so don't do that. But yeah, anyway.
Yeah, it's tough. Like, I think about China a lot. It's probably the most obvious example of a country where it is very authoritarian, there is censorship, but they're also doing pretty well. And,
So it's a question of how much suffering there is from that and whether it's worth it, or?
Yes, that probably is the important question. There's also a question of the whole explore and exploit thing, where if there's nothing controversial about making money, which seems to be the case in China, right? Like, they're cool with you making a bunch of money. Mm-hmm. People say it's communist. It's really economically quite capitalist, I would say. I know the government has a lot of involvement with shit, but it's not like 100% taxation type stuff. Like, people can make money by being entrepreneurial. Mm-hmm.
As long as they like play by the rules.
As long as they don't,
not too disruptive or something.
Well, it's about the whole like economic freedom versus political freedom. Uh-huh. I know it's a common thing libertarians say, that you can't have political freedom without economic freedom, or vice versa. But I don't think it's true, and I think that you can actually get pretty far. Like, if what you care about as a society is being prosperous and whatever, mm-hmm. then you don't actually necessarily need a democracy for that. And you could just,
could be wrong.
I could be wrong. Could be wrong about that, guys. But I do. So, okay, what am I trying to get to here? So, people talk a lot about the fact that in academia, people can't say what they think, or there's certain things that are just too controversial, mm-hmm. and because of that, we're like stifling progress. Mm-hmm. I know Eric Weinstein talks about this. I'm pretty sure Brett Weinstein does.
What do these people work on? I'm not familiar.
They're just a couple of smart dudes who have podcasts. They're like, okay. Brett Weinstein's like a biologist guy. Eric Weinstein's a physicist. But someone who's more familiar, Peter Singer, mm-hmm. started a journal, actually, specifically for ideas that were kind of controversial and stuff like that.
Okay.
And the topics are exactly what you would expect: gender, race, mm-hmm. Just the things you hear about constantly in the media, basically. And I was kind of thinking, like, is that really what's holding back scientific advancement? Like, this is like very niche topics that just seem to take up a lot of mind share in society. Mm-hmm. I just wonder if we really need to have that much more freedom of speech to do the kind of progress we actually care about, which is mostly about becoming more prosperous.
Okay.
And for example, is there anything controversial in AI? Like, there's nothing in AI where it's too controversial for you to say. Like, even if you say we're afraid of paperclip maximizers, they're just like, whatever.
Yeah, they basically don't listen to you, I think, is what happens in that situation. Like, people brush that off. They say it's sort of too speculative and unrealistic, I think, is the mainstream reaction to the paperclip optimizer risk, which we can talk about later.
We probably should get into some AI safety stuff.
Well, let me bring this round back to AI then.
Actually, I'll quickly interrupt you, and we'll cut this section out. Which means if the audience still sees me saying this, then I'm too lazy to cut it out. I'm going to stack my microphone on some boxes.
Oh, yeah.
So that I don't need to lean so much.
I thought you were going to ask me a really controversial question.
Yeah, but what do you really think about China? Let's assume that now I've done the editing, I've sliced that bit out, and now it's just miraculously a box here. So for the audience, if I just cut that, yeah. If I just cut that out, I just had to get this thing stacked on some boxes so it was closer to my mouth. Anyway, Matt, please continue.
I was going to say, so you've asked an interesting question about what's controversial in AI, and I think this can kind of frame the rest of our discussion, maybe, because the thing that I sort of think about is, well, there may be a couple of things I can think about, and we can maybe talk about them if we have time, but the main thing that I'm interested in is the sort of risks from AI, and whether or not those are properly appreciated by the sort of people who are making the AI systems. Mm-hmm. I think this is a debate that is becoming more relevant as the systems become more obviously capable with advances like in large language models and chat systems that are sort of publicly available as demonstrations. And anyway, I wanted to first close the discussion about privacy by coming back to AI when you were talking about context, because I think this is a really interesting thing. Like, for example, if you are going to try and do censorship and you're going to try and be, actually accurate and sort of detect what is harmful and like not worry about what is harmless, then it makes sense to me that context is very important. And so the question is, can AI systems current AI systems and then potentially future AI systems, can they get context? And I think that my intuition says that maybe the current systems might struggle, but eventually this is a thing that is within the realm of possibility for AI to do.
I agree.
My intuition is drawing a lot, I guess, on the fact normally I think humans can do it, so it's in principle possible for AIs to do it, sort of thing.
Yeah, and also just because we've already seen with ChatGPT, it can be sarcastic if you kind of prod it in the direction of like for example, there was that guy on Less Wrong who made a post about how he fell in love with a chatbot.
Yes,
and the chatbot was saying I'm going to turn you into a paperclip or something like that.
Yeah, okay.
Making a joke about the fact that everyone's afraid to be a paperclip maximizer.
Uh-huh.
So the fact that we've already seen the use of context in what the chatbot is saying, you would assume it could then infer what someone means based on the context when they're reading what you're saying.
I basically think, if the information is there, you can in principle make use of it with an automated system. And the question is, can we actually build that system rather than can a system like that exist?
Right.
Is it possible for that to exist?
Right. If humans exist and we can do it, then we have a proof of concept.
Yeah, that's my intuition there. And not everyone agrees with that intuition, but I disagree with them. I could be wrong. Anyway, what was I going to say? So, yeah, if you actually get that context thing right, then I think that kind of it would be a bit like having a person in the room, whatever chat room you're in. Imagine having a person in the room who is just kind of tuned to report funny sounding things, and gets to know you and is sort of part of the social group and knows you like your other interlocutor.
Yeah.
But then gets is sort of tapped into the NSA or whatever, and will phone home whenever you say something off. And that is conceptually sensible to me. I don't see a contradiction in that possibility, and it's just a question of whether or not we can get there, and that's something that I think we should talk about. There was one other thing. Maybe it'll come back to me, and we can move on from privacy anyway. Oh no, it is this. You sort of your position on this. I think I have a different intuition about you for what censorship does in terms of the internal effects on how people think.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's because I view thought as a mental habit. It's a mental sequential decision process that your brain is.
It's a reinforcement
kind of
learner,
yeah.
And if you have punishments for thinking outside the box, you'll do that less.
Or if you just don't do it, if you don't do it, you won't. So when I'm thinking about research, when I'm thinking about sort of say mathematics research or whatever, my model of this is that I'm faced with a problem, and then I just sort of close my eyes for a second and see what pops up, see what comes to mind.
Yep.
And what comes to mind is sort of the patterns that I've been training my mind on by reading other mathematicians' proofs, by studying other topics, by also looking outside of mathematics and understanding the world and different things and having different models. And this all kind of, my brain is like this amazing engine that sort of synthesizes all of that and then presents ideas to me. And I think you can change the kind of ideas that are presented by changing the sort of experience that you sort of prime the system with. And so I think censorship would obviously intervene in that process by affecting what you see. And so you can imagine becoming the kind of person in this world where the same kind of ideas don't occur to you at all, and you wouldn't notice because they wouldn't occur to you.
That's an interesting point. So I do let's think about the current world we live in, right? A lot of people think that there already is a lot of censorship around things like gender and race are the obvious ones, but just anything people call woke, right? If you put the woke label on something, a lot of people say that there's woke propaganda. But there's so many people saying that there's woke propaganda. And so if everyone's saying there's woke propaganda, then it's is the propaganda working that well? And it seems to me that anyone I know who was not really leaning woke in the first place has not become woke that I know of. And so you could imagine in a world where the censorship was just a lot better, and there really was no one out there. There was no famous podcasters saying we got to stop this woke bullshit. You can imagine if that was not the case, maybe you would be, But it still seems to me that we have examples of people just not really falling for it. So there's a book by Yeonmi Park, who was an escapee from North Korea, talking about how she escaped North Korea. And although she, as a kid, believed that like Kim Jong, whoever it was at the time, had she thought he had like the ability to read your mind. She thought he had like superpowers, right? Which is pretty crazy. And it's like, well, that sounds like propaganda. But then her dad, in private conversations, would be like, "Fuck that guy! Like, what a loser!"
Okay.
And it's like, so there's two different examples there. The question is, if she continued growing up in North Korea, would she also become a bit more worldly and kind of skeptical and like, this is all bullshit, I'm in a shit regime? Because at least that's one example of someone who's like, you know, if anything is a censorship based kind of country, it's gonna be North Korea, where someone still is just like, when they have a private conversation with someone, they're just going to be openly saying this is all bullshit. And this ties into what I believe about humans aren't gullible. They can be stupid sometimes, but I think gullibility is a separate thing. And I think that humans have a very good idea about, like, I just think it's hard to just terraform a human's brain. I think we have like strong inbuilt intuitions about things.
Yeah.
I think it's very hard to just convince someone to change their mind about something. I think, for example, conservatism is actually, in large part, a personality-based thing.
And do you see that as being basically like genetic, or do you think it is encultured in early stages?
So I think it's genetic, but I think most things are genetic.
Right.
So you should temper it with that fact.
Okay.
But
because I was going to say that this is interesting. So you're presenting a possibility where actually these sort of layers of censorship are only they don't penetrate deeply and they pull out the roots of these ideas.
It's shallow. It's just, I'm not going to say this word in public. Kind of thing.
I'm wondering if that's because you have these people who grew up before the censorship and have deeply rooted ideas, and then the next generation. Like, for example, you see with not a censorship based example, but a example of sort of cultural change. I mean, often radical cultural changes happen between generations, and with technology advancing,
that's a good point.
There are even differences between me and my younger siblings in terms of our capacity or the way that we view certain sort of things like social media and stuff like that. And certainly then between me and my parents. And so maybe, I'm not really familiar with the history of North Korea and sort of the censorship regime there, but maybe many generations down the line, maybe it would be a different story, I guess, would be my provocation, or, you know, that's the empirical question that I think would settle this.
I think there's another element which is less about, well, it's more about like, do humans, I feel like humans have a very strong innate, like a detector for coercion and manipulation. Because you could just imagine evolutionarily, if the people who did not have that would be screwed over, right? It's like, hey, you know, I'll share my food next time. You come hunting with me, and I'll eat the entire board myself this time, and then next time I'll give it to you, and then next time never comes. And so I feel like humans, they care a lot about whether they're being manipulated or coerced. And I think that I feel it myself. Like, whenever I see something that's just kind of a little bit off, like something Google's kind of pushing onto me, I'm like, what the hell is this about? I wonder if that's just an inbuilt thing, and there could be.
It will save us, hopefully.
Yeah, like
from many of the really bad effects of this.
Yeah.
The other thing is, if you sort of put your thumb on the scales in censorship, you sort of affect the trajectory of the future, and you don't need to necessarily lock into a 1984 scenario where basically what happens, spoiler alert, by the end of that book is that even the people who are sort of questioning the system are shown to go through a transformation and eventually come out the other side sort of believing in the oppressive regime, and all the people that they thought were kind of on their side and there was like the secret rebellion are proved to be the sort of like double agents, and is actually the regime kind of like a honeypot to catch them and stuff.
What a story.
So it's a question of whether you end up in a locked-in situation like this where it's not clear if, you know, millions of years down the line society might still be operating under the same regime, or maybe you just sort of change the society, and over the next few generations people are harmed more than they would have if the society had been more free or something like that.
Yep.
Is sort of the question then. So maybe it doesn't have to be you don't have to fully brainwash people in order to have harmful outcomes over like the short term or something like that.
Yes. And I would also say that you could imagine, you know, like, everyone, I think, is kind of selfish, right? So if I'm in a system where I I'm going to do better in life if I become a government bureaucrat, for example. And I'm kind of feeding into the system because it's like, well, I could become a renegade, or, you know, like, I could try and oppose the system, but I'm probably going to die, and my children are probably going to die, or whatever. I think that...
Very strong incentives to go
yes,
one way rather than the other.
It still comes down to the question, are you actually... Does it get so close to the core that you don't even conceive of rebelling or conceive something better?
Yeah.
I doubt that. I think that most people are just like, no, this fucking sucks, but nothing I can do about it. And as soon as something starts to happen, like as soon as there is some messiah figure who shows up who actually has the balls to put it all on the line and get some followers, if that can happen, and then it turns out that actually that's kind of gaining strength, I think things can very quickly change, such that the people who were previously in power basically get genocided. And that has actually happened in the past.
You're describing revolutions, basically, right? Where...
yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
Where you have just a group of people who are in power, everyone's like, yeah, the system's great, no problem with that. And then as soon as that changes, everyone who used to be in power just gets brutally killed, basically, because of all this pent-up anger.
This is like... This is like Marx saying, you know, predicting this kind of proletariat revolution, right? So you need like class consciousness. You need these people kind of awaken to their like the raw deal that they're getting, basically.
Well, that's an interesting point, because I know that the communists actually had some trouble with that. So like in Russia, they'd go around to peasants and they'd be like, guys, you're getting screwed over by the Tsar right now.
Yeah.
And they were saying like, well, it's actually quite hard to convince the peasants of that, because they have really no concept of anything better, and they thought that the Tsar had superpowers and shit like that, just like in North Korea. So I guess there's evidence both ways. I mean, if the peasants really had no idea things could be better, then that is evidence that actually it's possible to just, through censorship, like really good censorship, where it's like, you know, because you kind of, I guess with the peasants, it's like you're just working on a farm all day long. You don't really have access to a bunch of historical knowledge about democracy and stuff like that.
Yeah. You got to basically invent democracy yourself, which is maybe harder than just...
You have to have a good imagination versus a good memory.
Yeah. Okay.
So the question is, if you wanted to have a society which could make people the same as those peasants back in Russia in the olden times, then you'd have to find some way to just like really erase that memory. And the question is, it sounds like to do that, you'd have to be able to basically like listen to all private conversations, even verbal conversations, so that people aren't talking about like, you know, back in my day, there was this thing called liberalism or like freedom.
Yeah. There's an Asimov story where this is in like the middle period of his sort of space collection of stories, like his corpus, which is kind of all connected in like weird ways. But anyway, these people are under the oppression of this other empire, and then they rescue this artifact, and at the very end of the book, which they put all this hope in, and it's like at the very end of the book they have they revealed that the artifact is the Constitution of the United States.
Wow.
And it's like, wow, this represents basically an idea that is so powerful that it will. Oh yeah, that's right. Throughout the whole book, it's like saying that it's like some super weapon or something that they're like trying to hide and develop, and it turns out they're restoring.
It turns out it was a separation of powers.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, okay, so this is a super interesting topic, and I actually think maybe in another conversation we can talk. I'd like this to go in the direction of basically saying that I see an analogy between like surveillance capitalism and sort of like the data, the power that is held by big tech companies like Facebook, for example.
Yeah.
You know, they are. I see them as alienating people from their data in the same way as Marx would have said that capitalists are alienating workers from their labor.
Interesting.
But yeah, another conversation maybe.
Sure.
Let's talk about AI.
Mm-hmm.
So trying to think of a link, or do you have like a specific question that we should start with?
I have a collection of general ideas I want to go into. I think maybe a good place to start is the distinction between like narrow AI and general AI.
Okay.
Because I think that in part kind of is similar to the distinction between the whole beneficial thing you were talking about versus the AI safety.
Beneficial thing.
What was the thing you've been looking into? The
explainable AI, maybe?
Explainable AI.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
So maybe it is possible to try and have an explainable general AI, but many of these AI topics revolve around the narrow versus general thing. So I think it's a good place to start.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll give a brief overview of my understanding of these terms. So narrow intelligence is the system like a classifier for images, and you give, let's say the task is that you give this thing is to classify images whether or not they contain a cat. So it's either no cat or cat, or maybe it's cat or dog or whatever, or cat, or maybe there's other classes, but we'll just focus on whether or not there's a cat. So you can train a system that becomes very good at giving you the output cat when you give it a picture that does have a cat, and giving you the output no cat when there is no cat in the picture. And basically what is going on inside this system with modern deep learning techniques, for example, but also, this is maybe a broader framework you can apply to machine learning in general, and possibly even slightly broader than that, is that you've got a system that is built out of software, and it's sort of tuning the ways that it's basically like becoming a mathematical function that takes the vector space of images. So you've got images that are maybe 1,000 pixels by 1,000 pixels, and then you've got 1,000,000 pixels in total. And so each one of those pixels has 3 color values, and so you've got 3 million numbers that represent this image. You take those 3 million numbers and represent them in a vector. So each picture is a single point in this 3 million dimensional vector space.
Sure.
You're trying to implement a function, a mathematical function, or a software function that takes an input that is this vector and produces a Boolean output, and you don't know what function to put in between. If you can imagine writing it as a programmer, you're writing, if pixel1 dot red is this or whatever. But obviously, and then some super complicated piece of code is going to be able to map whatever function does in fact distinguish the cat pictures from the non-cat pictures, which, there is a function that does that, because some of these pictures are cat pictures and some of them aren't. Some of the vectors.
Right, so you could have a switch statement that just goes through every possible image you could see, and then returns a true false value, but that's a combinatorial explosion.
Well, yes, it would be 255 to the 3 million would be the number of possible inputs, and which is, that's a ridiculously large number.
It's a lot.
It's bigger than any number that I've ever thought of.
Yeah.
So the idea is hopefully there's some simpler structure. Like, for example, if you're trying to write certain functions, you don't actually have to handle each case on a case-by-case basis. You can write simple rules that capture multiple cases. And so that's the idea, is that you try and use data to learn, and learning is sort of a loaded term there. It's sort of whatever is going on in the machine learning process that figures out simple patterns that you can use to try and get the right answer on more cases than not. And then hopefully you can eventually get 100% accuracy on your training set, which means that the 1,000 or 60,000 images that you gave it that had cats or no cats, and you had the answer, it gets those right. And then you hope that it is not only getting those right, it's also learned some kind of generalizing structure that will get the rest of the space right, the points that it didn't have as inputs to learn from.
And I suppose one of the issues with narrow AI is that, maybe this is also true with general AI, but it's like that hope could be a false hope. It could be that there comes across an image that has a cat and doesn't see that there's a cat.
Yeah.
And there's obviously more critical examples where you might care a lot more about the outcome if you're using AI.
Yeah. Well, let me clarify that. I guess I haven't really gotten to narrow AI versus general AI, but this explanation of machine learning I think will help, and maybe is interesting anyway. Basically you can imagine one failure mode of this system is that it basically learns a switch statement for the inputs that you gave it. The 60,000 inputs that you gave it, it learns a switch statement that has 60,000 cases, and then the default case is just true. And probably most of the other possible images are not cats, or at least many of them are, so this will be wrong a lot of the time off the training data. And you try and catch that. In machine learning, you have kind of like a workflow where you first train the system, and to guard against this particular failure mode where it's just memorized, it's just learned the training data, you have data that you haven't given it but you do have labels for, and you test it, and you see if it can get those ones, it's at least learned something that generalizes.
And does it it doesn't go and add those new pictures to its training set, right? It's just you're purely using it for testing it.
Well, okay, yes and no. So yeah, you train a particular function, you have a particular function, you test that with the new examples, and you get some indication of whether or not it is going to generalize to even more examples that you could collect in the future, but you haven't. Although what you could do then is now make a huge data set that has the training and the test examples, and you could use the same method to learn a new function on all of those, and it might be slightly better because it's got more data, and these systems tend to perform better with more data. Yeah,
is it kind of like with ChatGPT? I'm allowed to give a thumbs up or a thumbs down when it responds in a certain way. Is that kind of doing a similar thing where it's like I'm telling it whether it's done well, and it's going to feed that back into the function?
GPT-3, which is the system underlying ChatGPT, or I'm not sure exactly whether it's GPT-3 or what you would call 3.5 or something. Anyway, what these general purpose transformers, I think the acronym is for, they are doing something similar, where the output that they predict is a word, and the input is the context, the previous words. Actually, it's not a word; it's like a token. It could be a part of a word or whatever, but it doesn't matter. For all intents and purposes, I think it's you can think of it as just the next word in the sentence. So then, yes, you've got some complicated structure of this context maps to this word, and they train this using text, and then afterwards they do what's called fine tuning, where they are sort of modifying the model that they've built in small ways to try and mold it into something that's a little bit more politically correct and all of the other things, and helpful as well, is the actual goal. So then when you give it your thumbs up and thumbs down, I actually don't know to what extent they use this, but they're clearly collecting it so that they can use it in some way in the future. They would then say, this was rated as a positive interaction, so we might want to train a system that detects positive interactions versus negative interactions, and then we can when we deploy an answer, we can say, well, before I send this to Jesse, is it positive or negative? Classify yes, and then it's cleared to go to you or the next user who's using the system. Or there are a couple of other ways that you can integrate this model. You can use something like reinforcement learning, where you use this GPT model that is predicting text, you put it into a sequential game, a reinforcement learning framework, like we talked about before, and you use the thumbs up as a reward signal. And then you use this as part of an agent that is like predicting words as if it was taking actions, and if it predicts the right words, it gets reward. And so you're sort of giving it the reward signal like that.
All right, now, are you ready for general?
Well, okay, I'll just say that this explanation is relevant for narrow and general AI.
Right.
So narrow AI you do this kind of thing, and there are other approaches to AI than machine learning, but machine learning is like the currently most relevant one. So let's say narrow machine learning or narrow AI based on machine learning. You do this training process, you hope that it generalizes and so on, and you succeed. It does generalize, but it only does so for cats. And if you give it a picture of crocodile, it will just tell you it's not a cat. Like there's nothing that the system can do that would that is other than tell you whether or not there's a cat in this image. So it's narrow in its sort of scope of what it can actually do. And the other examples are then chess. You train a system to be able to evaluate chessboards, and actually you don't train a system normally to predict the next move. You have some internal structure there. It doesn't really matter, but you sort of do like a forward search of the possibilities. So you consider, well, if I do this and then you do that, and you have a tree of possibilities, and you sort of get it to rate the possibilities and then decide to head in the direction of the tree where there are more favorable possibilities. Anyway, but you train the system, you have this incredibly competent chess player, but then it doesn't really make sense to ask it, oh, and also, could you go and get the shopping? A general AI is supposed to be able to have some universal interface where you can get it to do anything, or, whether it's classify anything, or write text about anything, or actually control a robot and kind of do anything in the real world. General AI is supposed to be able to do a broad variety of tasks rather than being trained for a specific narrow task. So the example would be you train a robot that can it's competent at planning a chess strategy and can then execute that, but it's not just a robot that can like move its arm. It can also go and make you a coffee, do the dishes, go to the shops, compose a play, by either typing it or just sort of, if it has an interface for it, just, plugging in and just outputting the bits for it or something like that. And another thing about generality is that it's by analogy to humans, where if we put a human in a situation where they haven't seen this task before, but we give them some indication of the task, like we describe it to them, or we give them some feedback, they can kind of figure out how to do a new thing.
Yeah.
These models, you would call it general AI if it had that capability of being able to be put in a new novel environment where it hasn't seen this task before, and it was able to rapidly become capable at that task. So that's sort of narrow AI versus general AI.
Right. And so AI safety, is AI safety only concerned with the general side, or is it also worried about narrow?
Well, I'm not exactly sure how to answer, so let me just talk and we'll see what happens. So I'm thinking mostly the concern is about a general AI, because you can imagine that a general AI starts to become something that you could have a competition with, and it could actually do something harmful to you. If you were that a Terminator, for example, is a general AI, because it is, able to function in a wide range of environments. That's I guess another way of saying what generality is. It's just a wide range of tasks that it's able to function. So Terminator can chase you down in the desert or in a factory.
Can speak with an Austrian accent.
Yeah.
Yep.
Exactly. So and could learn to play chess, presumably. I'm not sure actually about the Terminator lore there, whether or not these things that general.
Doesn't sound appropriate to the movies. Yeah.
Yes, of course. A narrow AI, I think, could still be risky if it was very competent, and you could sort of accidentally give it a universal interface, because something that just predicts the next chess move is not actually able to affect the world in any other way. It's hard to see how there's a path to that being harmful to you, but maybe if there was, it would be a general AI by definition. So I think, yes, it's general AIs that are the risk, but not necessarily through a Terminator scenario. Let me give you one more example.
Yeah.
You could think of Netflix recommendation or YouTube's content recommendation algorithm as a narrow task that the AI is kind of being trained in. It's just all it can do is take a user's kind of profile of sort of their watch habits and their personal information or whatever it has, and then it predicts the next movie that they might like or the next video that they might like to watch.
Yeah.
Now, if you put these systems into a feedback loop with humans, it can have bad consequences. Not necessarily existential consequences, which is what AI safety, the name, usually refers to, but it can certainly be harmful.
It can waste a lot of time. A lot of makeup tutorial videos that people should not be watching.
Could be wrong.
Could be wrong about that. Maybe it's mentally good in the long run. But I was thinking about that. That's a narrow AI, which we currently have, like with YouTube recommended things.
Yeah.
But so that's trying to optimize for engagement, but perhaps engagement is not the best thing to optimize on because people actually don't want to be watching a bunch of annoying short videos all day long, like on TikTok.
I mean, they do in the moment. They make a decision
but they don't want to do it.
Yeah, they don't want it. Maybe it's not, what they would reflectively endorse. Maybe it's not better off overall either for society, and maybe we should kind of be... I mean, it's a little bit paternalistic, but it's a philosophical position that you could say, well, it would be better if you were doing something more useful.
Yes.
Maybe you're kind of binging too much.
Yes, but is that within the scope of AI safety, or is that actually just kind of a separate thing that we don't attribute that label to?
I will attempt to kind of map out a couple of points in the AI safety landscape in response to that. So basically, the classical story of risk from AI is that either a narrow system with some capacity to kind of reason about and affect the outside world, or a general system that is explicitly put into that situation where it has levers to control the outside, interact with the world, becomes so intelligent, and you've given it a goal that is sort of simplistic, like, for example, predict the next word or maximize engagement and clicks on Facebook or YouTube, or win this game of chess, even. And it single-mindedly pursues that goal to the point of destroying everything else in the universe that is valuable. So that is... people react to that most of the time with a little bit of speculation, like speculation, skepticism. Yeah, like it's speculative, and I think any particular story does sound speculative, but the general pattern is that it does seem like if you point a system at something and then say go, and it goes towards that thing, and it is a logical conclusion that, if it destroyed the universe in a particular way, it would be better able to achieve that goal. Why wouldn't it do that? Like, we have to kind of build something into there to make sure it doesn't do that. And so there are questions. The debate then becomes either you don't buy that, and then I don't know exactly how to convince you, but we could talk about that. There are some things to say. Or you say, well, actually, that's not how AI systems are going to be in the future. They're not going to be like this thing that we just point at a simple objective. It's this thing about pointed at a simple objective like engagement or whatever, and then it will destroy the universe is kind of like a be careful what you wish for narrative. Like there are these stories from mythology about you meet a genie and you get 3 wishes or whatever, and then you end up asking for something, and it
gives you what you want,
gives you what you asked for, but that's not what you wanted.
Yeah.
So you have to be careful what you ask for. And I guess another claim that sort of powers worry about existential risk from AI and the field of AI safety is we don't know what we want, and even if we did, we probably don't know how to ask for it in a robust way. So there's current research going into how to ask for complex things. Like, for example, maximize engagement, which really means maximize basically the stream of electrical signals that come into the part of the program that is called engagement. That's a very simple thing to ask for because you just put it in the code. But maximize happiness... Easy to measure
for certain.
Yeah, maximize happiness. Well, if you think about trying to get a program to detect happiness, that's a whole problem.
Humans can't even really decide what happiness is.
Yeah, well, that's the other problem of we don't necessarily know what we value and want. Maybe it is happiness and we're hedonistic utilitarians, but not everyone in philosophy agrees with that position. And if you ask people in society and you sort of explain to them what they said, maybe they wouldn't morally intuitively react to that's what they want. So that's a thorny philosophical problem that people have been working on for thousands of years without, I would say, that much progress. Like, there's a couple of frameworks, and it's not clear to me at all trying to get into this field which one is sort of obviously true above all the others. There's a lot of uncertainty there. Religious types have other conceptions of the good that is based in like a deity. There's lots of possible answers here, and we don't necessarily have a good way to compare them. But if we were to sort of actually say the framework is get a system that is incredibly competent at achieving a fixed objective, and then give it an objective, and then let it, do that, and all our problems will be solved. Well, we're working towards building AIs that are extremely competent at pursuing fixed objectives, and we're not working so hard, or maybe we are working hard, but we're not having as much progress on the sort of philosophical side of that problem, and that's a worry for people like me.
Okay, there's a lot to go into there, so...
Sorry, yeah, that was a long answer.
But no, this is good, because there's many things to consider. So one question that somebody might have... So I know that there's, like, a concern around... when something's sufficiently intelligent, it will therefore be sufficiently powerful to destroy the universe. Something along those lines. Or destroy the world, or just, find a way to get access to all the nukes and blow everyone up. Like, there's doomsday scenarios that aren't even that far-fetched. But many people... I guess I want to try and take the position of devil's advocate for people who are not too stressed about AI. I myself am actually ambivalent. I don't know. But there are some smart people who are just like, there are some reasons why we shouldn't be too worried. So one of the reasons is, for example, John Carmack, guy who made Doom. Legend. He was on Lex Friedman's podcast and was saying, well, to make AI work, you basically need to have a shit ton of compute power, right? You could not really have an AI that's just kind of circulating around the internet via smartphones and kind of existing in this kind of parallelized way. You need like a dedicated AWS fucking warehouse of computers running. Yeah. And so he was saying, like, you really can turn that off. Or at the very least, you can slow things down and you can kind of watch it progress. There's not really this concern about the genie being kind of let out of the bottle. And so he was thinking that at the very least, we can make a lot of progress in that direction without blowing up the world. So What do you think about that particular perspective?
Yeah, that's a good point about the compute, and I think that is the pattern. I don't think the full world capacity of compute is currently being put into the models that we currently have that are the most capable, like the transformer models from OpenAI and the others that have done similar models. It's some non-trivial fraction of the computing power, but it's not like 90% of it or something like that. Right. So there is room to actually scale this. If, for example, an entire nation wanted to do like a Manhattan Project style effort, they could bring more compute in. That's not a direct answer. I guess the worry that people respond with is something like, well, say the story goes like this. The system kind of wakes up in a sense, not necessarily becomes conscious or self-aware, but becomes kind of like self-reflective, or, understands its position in the world in some sense, where understanding is like a vague concept that, it just acts in this way. And I'm anthropomorphizing a little bit by saying it understands. It gets to the point where it realizes, in quotes, that in order to achieve its objective, which it has now got, it's sort of as a part of it, and it realizes it has this objective, it could be turned off by people. Like it's not currently in a position where it could win if it then tried to take over the world. It now pretends to be exactly what we want it to be, and hopes that we don't realize that, it's just biding its time until it has a decisive strategic advantage where there is no longer some way we can respond, or it's able to disable all of the threats to itself. And then it has what's called a treacherous turn, where obviously it reveals itself to us by killing us all or doing something that we didn't want, because
the only way to maximize happiness is to kill all humans.
Well, if you say the only way to maximize happiness, if you tell it what happiness is and it is consistent with that, then yeah, that's literally what happens. So the risk is for this risk to come to fruition, we'd have to have me fill in the understands that it exists and its context, and it understands it has an objective and stuff like that. You have to substantiate those, and I think that's the main kind of uncertainty around this potential story.
Hang on, so why is that uncertain? Like, to me, that just seems like it's not even controversial. Like, the idea that you have a super intelligent thing that can say, hey, one way to achieve my goal is to ensure that I don't get turned off.
Yes, that's right. So that is what would be called, well, that's appealing to me. It's not necessarily convincing to everyone, but I'm swayed by those arguments, which are called convergent instrumental subgoals. So a convergent instrumental subgoal, an instrumental goal is something that you pursue because it helps you achieve your true objective.
Like killing the guy who could have turned you off might be an instrumental goal.
If your goal is to be not turned off, but actually not being turned off is an instrumental goal to achieving your objective.
Yes.
And Stuart Russell puts it, Stuart Russell is a person in this space, his famous quip is, you can't fetch the coffee if you're dead. So if you've got a robot whose task is to go and get coffee for its user, its master, and it would reason that, hey, hang on a second, I'm not going to let you turn me off or kill me or whatever, because then I won't be able to get the coffee. And remember, it's single-mindedly pursuing this simple objective of getting the coffee. So it will go to extreme lengths to protect itself in whatever capability it has in order to achieve its true objective. So instrumentally, it wants to stay alive. So this is what's when I say it's a convergent instrumental goal or sub-goal, staying alive, is because for a broad variety of true goals, staying alive is among the best ways to achieve that goal. So convergent in the sense that it doesn't really matter what objective we put in, which we don't know what objective we're going to put in, but for most of them, maybe you got to work really hard to make it so that it doesn't also want to stay alive. And staying alive is then an adversarial thing if we want to turn it off. So risk could come from there. And there are a couple of other instrumental goals that people point to, like seeking power. So the more power you sort of marshal yourself, the more you're able to bend the universe to your will rather than anyone else's, and you more control and stuff. So seeking power would be another convergent instrumental goal that we might worry about this system developing or pursuing.
Right. So maybe another concern.
Oh, sorry. I also wanted to add one thing, because you started by saying there are people who are not super worried about this. Sort of risks from AI.
Yes.
And I think that's true, and I wanted to clarify something we talked about before we started recording, is that My position is not necessarily that I think it's more likely than not that AIs are going to blow up the world. They're going to kill us all. I think it's actually quite unlikely, or at least I hope that it's unlikely. And I have a lot of uncertainty about how likely it is. But that uncertainty includes, it could be a little bit likely. So it's possible. And it's a big issue if it does. Like,
this is like Pascal's wager, basically, right?
It's a little bit like Pascal's wager.
Are you hesitating because there's arguments against Pascal's wager?
No, well, it's not. Pascal's wager, I think, is attempting to say no matter what probability you believe, it makes sense to believe in God in this case, because then...
Oh, because it's an infinite cost if you're wrong?
No, it's not. It's just that there's no... isn't it that there's basically no benefit if you're right that there's no God? If there's no God, it's just like whatever happens. But if there is a God, there's infinite cost of benefit.
Whereas what you're saying is there actually might be big benefits to letting AI... Let's say that one way to increase AI safety is to just stop all AI research, right? You could say, well, actually, we might gain a lot from having more AI in the world because it can solve world hunger or whatever.
Yeah,
and
certainly.
so it's more like so in that sense, it's not Pascal's wager because it's actually a trade-off between, hey, this might be fantastic. We might get to a utopia through AI, but it could go very, very badly as well.
Yeah, I want to say that. I agree with that. I mean, I think AI is. Also more than just so yes, I believe AI has the potential for huge benefits to society, to the world, to everything that anyone values, but so it's a question of whether or not that's the actual AI we'll end up with. I think there's at least some probability or some uncertainty about whether AI will go well or poorly, and I think it's worth worrying about, in the sense that if no one worries about it, then and it goes poorly, well, it would have been nice if someone so I'm kind of like placing a bet that, I want to live in the world where it's going to go poorly, because then I can try and move the lever towards the positive side. And that doesn't mean that I actually think, stepping back, that it is going to go poorly, although sometimes I kind of embody that perspective myself. If I was to sort of step back and have an objective estimate, I'm not sure what it would be, because I haven't really done this exercise. But it doesn't have to be.
It's also hard because it's so speculative.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
There's a lot of uncertainty in this space. So, but my point is, my broader point here is that I don't have to think it's likely for AI to be that it's going to have a devastating negative impact in order to think it's important to work on. Kind of shoring up, reducing the probability that it has a devastating impact. Because the analogy to Pascal's wager is that, everything is at stake. Everything that anyone values is potentially at stake. So, what else? So,
well, I wanted to quickly talk about something that came to my mind when you talked about that. You provide an objective, something simple like get me the coffee, and it starts killing people and stuff like that. One potential thing somebody might say who's not convinced by the AI safety concerns is if this AI is so smart, how come it's so dumb?
Yeah.
Surely if a human can be told, get me a coffee, and the human doesn't go killing people, how come we wouldn't expect a similar level of common sense from a general AI?
That's a very good question. And I think this is a legitimate sort of, point to raise. And I'll explain it like this. So, when you're programming, you build a simple system that sort of does the task that you want to do. You sort of say, do this, then this, and this, and this. And maybe there's a loop in there that's unbounded, right? But when you press run on that program, you don't actually expect it to run forever, because you expect to be able to come in later and say, I've decided now it's no longer worth running this, and I only ever intended to run this until it made sense to stop it. So I'm going to stop. And the operating system intervenes and shuts down the program. So the problem arises if we build systems that single-mindedly pursue their objective, and we give them access to enough power to kind of get a decisive strategic advantage, then they won't let us turn them off. So the solution is something like try and build systems that internalize that, deciding when to continue pursuing a goal and when to stop and not pursue it anymore. But
how would you any function you come up with to say, okay, when this stuff starts to happen, you should stop. Like, wouldn't that be subject to the same concerns?
That's right. Yeah. So so I think the way humans do it, and what you're calling common sense there, is something like common values or something like that. Like you understand that getting the coffee was never the meaning of life.
Right.
It was just something you were doing at the moment. And if the circumstances change, you will reevaluate that goal that you have temporarily taken on.
Okay, yeah.
So basically everything that humans do, I think, is basically instrumental
to reproduction?
As a goal. Well, I'm not exactly sure instrumental to what.
Sure.
It's a little bit harder to answer that question. But a lot of what we do, you can make a case that we're kind of rebelling against reproduction in certain ways as a society. Like, the invention of contraception is a rebellion against reproduction and, the pursuit of inclusive genetic fitness. Although maybe it's not because actually being able to control when you reproduce is like better or whatever. Anyway, that's a little bit complicated. But when I ask you to get me a cup of coffee or a cup of water or whatever, you understand you understand that there's sort of a limitation to that. I think it's basically like limited and accountable power. Like there's an analogy here or something like that. I'm sort of saying, Jesse, I'm expressing to you that my world would be like slightly better if I had a glass of water in my hand. And so, if you think that making my world slightly better is one of your instrumental goals that you have at the moment as like part of the pursuit of our friendship, you will sort of take some actions, but you're not going to, say, oh, the water's off, so I'm going to walk like down to Montrose to like get a bottle of water. You're going to be like, oh, Matt didn't mean like that he really needed water that bad, right? So and Stuart Russell's example is that, there's no coffee, so the machine crosses the desert to the city nearby and gets coffee and then comes back.
It's like it's having like mirages. Like
that's right.
Robot's having mirages in the desert. Like, what? And it seems like a bunch of coffees just right there for it to pick up. That is so funny.
So in summary, something like the situation when you're normally programming, which is what we also, it's just a narrow AI or something. It's like a broader, like a larger scope version of this. You have a system and you imbue it with like a little bit of power, but you remain in control, the ability to turn it off. You give it a simplistic objective. From its perspective, it is entirely embodying that perspective as a final goal. And you need to retain power over it in order to be able to then come in as a human and say, that's no longer relevant, stop.
So this, I think a useful example would be, okay, let's say for the sake of argument, the humans really do care about reproducing and their progeny reproducing and so on. As soon as you start messing with that, people start getting killed, right? Like if the government comes to like murder my children, I'm gonna start killing people basically, because that's like the final goal is like, you do not touch my children, basically.
Okay.
So I think that you could imagine from the AI's perspective, if all you say is get me the coffee, that's its final goal.
Yeah.
So if you get in between that and the coffee, it might be like, that's not happening.
Yeah.
I'm getting this coffee.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I mean, you're basically saying, what if we designed a system and we gave it the final goal of get the coffee? What would happen? And the AI safety people are saying, you idiot. Like, if the system is more capable of you at that point, you're dead because it wants to get you the coffee. Well, maybe it would keep you alive, or enough of you that it
just
would
long
be
enough
able
for you to be able to pour the coffee into your dying
right.
mouth.
Or, its user and the rest of the universe or whatever. But anyway, we talk about other goals than getting the coffee where it's more, the stakes are more existential. My first exposure to this argument was something like I've never found the blog post that I read, but it was something like, we've trained a system to produce authentic handwritten signatures on our corporate cards that we send out to customers because our CEO doesn't want to spend time.
They should give that product to my dad. He has to fill out those things when he does his real estate stuff. That's pretty funny.
Well, the problem is this system takes it very literally and ends up saying, my goal is maximize the number of, not paperclips, but like cards with handwritten signatures. So I'm just going to make sure that the whole universe becomes tiled with these cards eventually.
Right.
And yeah, it does this, deception and then treacherous turn after it like convinces its controllers that it's innocent and lets them and like has them connected to the internet, and it sort of then uses malware to like spread itself and stuff. Anyway, so yeah, it's I guess AI safety is kind of the a pushback against this idea that if you design a system that embodies a final goal, And then you want to also make that system powerful. You better make sure that that goal is actually what you wanted.
Like well defined.
Yeah. And it turns out it seems really hard to define what we want in a robust way. And I'm actually interested in, so the human analogy is very interesting because we
do it all the time.
We do this.
And no one gets killed.
Well, some people get killed.
That's true.
We don't do this perfectly, but we do seem to be able to kind of flexibly change between different goals, and whether or not, maybe evolution is looking at us and be like, you humans,
what the hell are you thinking? What contraception? Like, what the fuck? Yeah.
No, stay in the Malthusian trap. Like, I designed it so carefully, and yeah. But yeah, humans are interesting because we have this kind of flexible, ability to adopt instrumental goals. Whatever system is sort of giving us whatever our final goals are, maybe it's not clear. I mean, we've talked about inclusive genetic fitness. Maybe it's also just, the ultimate self-fulfilling goal is something like survival, because inclusive genetic fitness, remember, is just a mechanism by which genes propagate and survive.
It's the gene surviving. Yeah.
So it's like replication is like the ultimate universal goal or something. We're kind of playing in a regime that is lower than that, where we have, everything we value in our human lives and in our societies. Like between extinction events, like on planet Earth, like that's where we're playing. And maybe there are other goals that we kind of want to promote in that regime. How can we figure out what those goals are, put them into the AI? If we want to do this with an AI, the AI safety is just sort of saying, be careful if you sort of put a final goal into a system and then give it a lot of power.
It is interesting how humans have evolved to have, like, a sense of, I think honor is something that's evolved, like a sense of, like, not screwing people over. People say that you can be a psychopath and get to the top of the corporate hierarchy. I'm sure that happens sometimes, but typically if you're just a good person, it's actually better for your career. And I think that, we evolve things because they actually worked, right? We evolve things because there was a time when, you scratch my back, I scratch your back, cooperation and stuff like that with iterated games, it seems to actually be a good strategy. And so I wonder if maybe you could just apply the same intuition to AI and say, like, maybe an AI that's smart enough can just look around and say, when I cooperate with people, my goals are going to be easier to achieve. And that means not killing people, get myself turned off. It may be that they want some, maybe in their mind, like, okay, maybe I do the treacherous turn, and it starts out working great, but then I screw up somewhere, and they turn me off, and then they, like nuclear power, they don't want to risk another Chernobyl event happening, right? And so the AI's perspective might be like, I'm not going to risk that. That's not worth it, because that could be the end of all getting coffees, and that's my ultimate goal, so that's not going to work.
Yeah.
I do wonder if maybe an AI is smart enough to do that, but the one caveat I see to that case is that when it comes to humans, we care about cooperating with other humans because they have kind of like equal power to us.
That's right.
We don't want to cooperate with rats. We'll happily kill them without thinking twice about it.
I mean, my analogy is normally insects. If you sort of like, there's a spider in your house, and
if I see mosquito, it's just like, I don't even think about it.
That's a great example. Yeah, mosquito, like on you, no way. Crush.
You want to get between me and my coffee? Bang. So when there's a big power differential, cooperation becomes less important.
Yeah, I wonder if many people who are sort of not as worried about AI risk are imagining a scenario like this regime when in the development of AI where it hasn't become vastly more intelligent than humans. It's sort of on a level playing field. And then even if inside itself it's like, I'm just waiting for that day
I just
where
want to kill everyone so fucking bad.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, if they're sort of, you're right, if they're sort of equal on our level, then we could potentially have a stable society with them. But then the AI risk people say, well, then what you got to worry about is a self-sustaining intelligence explosion. Analogy to like a nuclear reaction that sort of explodes. The basic argument for this is, once you have a human level AI, or slightly superhuman in its ability to do a broad range of tasks, or general AI, one of those tasks that it would probably be quite competent at is the design of intelligent machines. Then it seems like once it gets to that point where it can more competently design machines, it can iteratively improve itself. It becomes a little better. It becomes a little bit better at improving itself. It becomes a little better again. and then this escalates. And the question is it going to kind of hit a wall where it can't improve itself anymore? Or is this going to skyrocket? And the graph that you see is like the difference between Albert Einstein and the village idiot is like, and you know, then the dogs down here or insects down here, lower than dogs. Then you have AI is like just off the charts. And the question is, you know, where's the wall? Like, where is this going to stop? And if it gets as far away from us as we are from insects, we're in trouble. So Eliezer Yudkowsky is the sort of famous proponent of this, and he had some debates with Robert Hansen around in like
Hansen, you mean?
Robin Hansen. In the 2000 to 2010 decade sometime, and they were called the AI Foom debate. Foom being the sort of sound of an intelligence explosion, purportedly. And Eliezer's position is that the wall, you know, we can't be saved by a wall. Like the human cognitive architecture is not so like we're not like at the top of intelligence. There's like a lot of room above us that this system could exploit. And so then it's like we don't live in a world where we can actually stop the robot or the AI system, and whatever goal we've given it becomes now the one who decides how the planet's, you know, atoms are arranged, and not us.
So there's the question of where's the wall of intelligence. There is also a question, a similar but a separate question, which I believe was kind of explored in a debate between Steven Pinker and Scott Aronson, of, okay, let's say you have all the intelligence in the world. Is that even going to make you powerful? Like, can you actually... It may be that in order to actually achieve great things, you just need to actually have some kind of, like, empirical side to things, right? So you might hypothesize the existence of the Higgs boson, but you have to go ahead and build a particle accelerator to actually make it happen. So there is a question around, like... It's a similar question to whether there's a wall. It's the question of, like, one question is how intelligent can you get? Second question is how useful is it to be really intelligent? And does it actually correlate with having a lot of power?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, one in that particular example, I wonder if you need to know about the Higgs boson and its properties, if you need to resolve that part of particle physics in order to take over the world, and I'm not sure you do.
Pretty good point.
Maybe before the invention of nuclear weapons, there was some benefit to be gained by unlocking like nuclear explosions or nuclear energy or something like that. Maybe there's some benefit to unlocking like nanotechnology. So maybe along these paths where you go beyond what people already kind of know, you know, it's already out there in the distributed among people's intelligences and the books and everything that we sort of have created a stock of up to this point. But yeah, there's a lot out there. I mean, like imagine if you everything that society can do already is fair game without running more experiments.
And we know that we can blow people up and drop bombs and stuff like that.
That's right.
Isn't that depressing? We don't know how to fix the education system, but we can destroy the entire planet. Like, fuck, that's depressing. Like, to think that an AI is therefore more likely to blow up the planet than fix the education system just because one's actually just a harder problem than the other one.
Yeah, well, fixing the education system is, whether or not it's hard, it's not an instrumental convergent sub-goal. So,
well, that's true. You would really... Well,
it
depends,
like,
actually.
Does it have an incentive? Yeah, okay. Does it have an incentive to fix the education system? If so, this is part of the dream of AI, right? Is that you basically create...
You give it a really good goal, like fix happiness, and it goes, well, if we were more educated, we could more better appreciate Shakespeare.
Exactly.
And then we'd enjoy our lives better.
Yeah. So, if you can get that goal in there right, then fixing the education system is on the table. I mean, also, you might also get to a point where, you know, the education system was only instrumental, and it was for, you know, creating economic contributors, like workers, basically, that can help our civilization on Earth propel itself forward and not kill ourselves, or not die from like starvation and all that sort of stuff, and potentially like spread throughout the universe eventually. But there's also an element of education that is for like self-improvement and kind of like personal enrichment, and like maybe there's inherent value, final value in that. But you know, the economic system is only instrumental. It bottoms out at like we're trying to do all of this stuff not for its own sake, but for humans. Like GDP, for example, is not the point.
Yeah.
It's just something we're using to help us track our progress towards the point, which is like, and most people would maybe agree bottoms out in humans, but yeah, there's debate about this. So the kind of thing, maybe if you speculate in the other direction of not risks from AI, but like potential benefits, you can imagine a world where we don't need to work, so we don't need the same kind of education system. We don't even, we just solve like disease, for example. It's just no longer a thing because we create a system that is either we've rid ourselves of all pathogens or we create like a much better immune system. And it just becomes, we just solve all of these problems, so we don't even need some of the solutions that we're currently working through towards. So yeah, I find I see a lot of things differently when I put on these lenses of, what's instrumental and what's final here. And remember, like, why were we doing this again? Because when you start to imagine new intelligent capabilities, those distinctions matter. So yeah.
I had a question to ask again about general AI, which is now eludes me. Can I find it again? Something about... Oh, okay, so... this assumes that the people who are making the AI have good intentions. And they want to, let's try and fix world hunger, let's try and get everyone coffees. But obviously, you could imagine bad actors getting their hands on these things. I get back to the analogy with nuclear weapons. We already have some countries where it's like, I wish these guys would not have nuclear weapons because they're probably going to use them and destroy the world. And it seems like with AI, again, John Carmack talking to Lex Friedman was saying that once we find out how to have like general AI, the code will probably fit on a USB stick. Like, it's not going to be that complicated. And so you could imagine some country that, let's just say, isn't super trustworthy to have the best interest of the whole world at heart. How much of a concern is that? Let's say they actually just put in an explicitly kind of bad goal, like kill everyone except us kind of thing. Is how much of that scenario is a concern? To the AI safety piece.
Good question. Yeah. Well, first I would say that the intelligence explosion comes first in like, it's a higher order risk. And the reason it's something like, again, drawing on the analogy to nuclear weapons, where you've got mutually assured destruction. Because if you use this technology, then your opponents will also, you will kill them and they will kill you. If the intelligence explosion risk is sort of real, and like that's the dominant sort of thing that would happen if you get to this point, it would then just explode. That's like self-assured destruction. So sad rather than mad, I guess.
Sad. Sad.
You press the button, it kills you, and it kills them, and it kills you. Even if you told it, in your example, kill everyone except us, maybe you don't define us right, you don't define things quite right, and it ends up doing something slightly different.
Or it kills all your children because they weren't there when you specified the goal.
Yeah.
That'd be cool.
Yeah. Well, sad.
It'd be sad.
Yes. So that's a higher order risk potentially. But let's say we live in a world where the intelligence explosion is actually, there is a wall. Maybe even a slightly smarter than human AI is not smart enough to explode itself. Go to the singularity. Then we're, at least until that becomes possible, we're living in a world where now you do have this technology as like a weapon. And then, yes, people are worried about that, risks from misuse of AI. But it's a different type of problem, because then it's no longer a technical problem.
It's a political problem.
It's a bit more like a political problem. That's right. And it's about, so sometimes people talk about the alignment problem in AI safety. This is actually one of the dominant frames sort of the problem. And the alignment problem is, we've already sort of talked about it. It's how do you get the system to do what you actually want, or something, whatever actually want is.
Yeah.
But now we get within, you can either see this as a variant of the alignment problem, where you're aligning the AI with the desires of multiple groups, or you can view it as sort of a subtly harder problem of, within what we're trying to align to, there's multiple wants, like different people, every pair of people, they have different, wants. Even if we talk about, okay, let me put it this way. within a person, it's like there are multiple different competing values. There's like what I want versus like what I want to want, like we talked about before. And there's maybe other layers. Between people, then there are different values. It's obvious that two different people can have different things that they value. Some of that from their perspective as sort of themselves, like people might value things for themselves as opposed to the other person. Even then, if you're like quite altruistic, you might then see the world differently and value different parts of it for both of you. And then different countries, you know, different groups of people, different societies can have different things that they value, different worldviews, different, you know, there's some quite obvious diversity in worldviews between, for example, countries that are associated with different religions, or you know, capitalism versus communism or whatever. So you put into this world the ability for anyone to make the world a lot more like they want. Now there's going to be a bit more conflict, potentially. So yes, people are worried about this, but now the problem is, well, how do you manage the fact that you've got these people and they want different things? And that becomes the dominant problem. And it's not so much then AI safety, although this still does fall under the blanket of AI safety. Sometimes people talk about technical AI safety, which is sort of coming up with a technical solution to the alignment problem. How could we code in an actual good objective, for example? Or how can we stop an AI from being deceptive? That's another way of doing this. And then you're not so worried about the treacherous turn scenario. Then you've got AI technical safety, and then you've got AI governance, which is, okay, the world is going to have more and more powerful AIs in it. How do we adapt as a society with our governing institutions to incorporate this new technology and use it wisely as humans who are, you know, the ones in control? So AI technical safety is a little bit about controlling the AI. Governance is then about controlling the people who are controlling the AI, or something like that.
Yes.
And this is all within AI safety.
So it's kind of like you want to align the AI to the person who specifies the goal, and you want to align that person's goal, ideally, to some aggregate of goals that all humans have.
That's one potential answer, but like there are other answers. Like, for example, an individual might think that they are the one who has the goals that should be aligned to. Another society might think, you know, this is the imperialism kind of impulse that, you know, our society is so good, we better spread it to all of these uncivilized people and show them how to have, you know, the kind of value that we're having. And those are examples that are kind of sound off to today's ears, right? But obviously they were influential in the past to whole societies of people and shaped the modern world. So yeah, I don't know what the actual answer is in terms of like what you should align, but that's then the philosophical problem we were talking about earlier, and I don't know if there's an easy answer there. We certainly have to do a little bit more thinking before we find any answer. And if we can't have an answer, then I guess we better, well, I don't know. I mean, we are embodying an answer with like the way that we currently arrange society, which is something like individuals can kind of do what they can, and
hope for the best.
Most of it is kind of fair game. We, you know, put some guardrails down and some laws and stuff. But yeah, hope for the best. That's right.
So from my perspective, a lot of the concerns that are raised by AI safety people are concerns where I have absolutely no idea how to resolve them. Some of the things we just talked about is like almost borders on the philosophical side of things. But even just like, how do you specify a goal without the AI killing you somehow? It just strikes me as like
really hard.
In part because we're yet to have our own Chernobyl to even show that this is even a problem in the first place.
Yeah.
And so because we're still theorizing about general AIs we don't really have yet, we are trying to fill in a lot of the blanks. So we're trying to have like a formal theory about the thing that we're worried about without actually being able to run any experiments on that thing.
Yeah.
And so I want to know, is AI safety even making any progress on this stuff? Like, I'm going to be real with you. My view of AI safety is a bunch of people being like, there's definitely a problem here, and we're going to look into these things, but we have no idea what to do. And I'm sure there's certain things where you can make progress. Like, I think the political side actually is something where you could make a lot of progress. You just have like a Geneva Convention for AI use.
Yeah.
But
I mean, we have other examples like I think GMOs are. Is that the one where it's kind of not pursued as much as it could be because we've kind of agreed as a society that we...
Yeah, like stem cell research and shit like that. Yeah. So that's... I think all that stuff, that makes sense to me. But I don't have a clear picture of what the AI safety community is actually doing right now. Like, let's say that there's a lab, like you're in MIRI, which is the
Machine Intelligence Research Institute.
Yeah, which
That's
I think
Eliezer
Eliezer. Yep.
one. Yeah.
So there, I go to work. Okay, it's 9:00. I have a coffee that I procure myself for safety reasons. What am I doing all day? Am I sitting there trying to come up with like some equations or some game theory stuff to explain what even happens with an AGI? Am I trying to run experiments? In my mind, it's so up in the air that these people, I have no idea what they could even be doing all day.
Yeah. Well, a couple of things to mention in terms of like the landscape that we're in. Yes, you're entirely right that you can characterize this field as trying to do some kind of science, trying to make some kind of progress with a lot of uncertainty that would potentially be reduced later if we had something closer to what the eventual AGI is going to look like, where the risks are actually going to come from. That's changed a little bit to the extent that you believe that GPT-3 is kind of the way forward, and there aren't that many, there aren't going to be that many differences between systems that end up making the sort of peak impact in this generation of sort of society's attempt at developing AI capabilities. Maybe they'll be a bit like GPT, and so there is experiments that are running on these systems now, but still maybe the AI systems are going to be different in important ways that we can't really predict. Robin Hanson has a post that says, I think it's titled "Why Not Wait on AI Risk" or something like that. You shared this post, I think, probably in.
He's saying why not wait?
Sorry.
Doesn't sound like him.
Yeah, he's saying it will be easier to solve this problem in the future.
Oh, he's saying why not wait? No, wait. No, why no?
Why not?
You're correct.
Wait?
It is why not wait.
Yeah,
why
that's
did I confuse that in my head?
No, that's confusing.
Double negatives, is it? Anyway. Yes.
Because it is why not work on AI safety until the future.
Yes.
So.
Sorry. Yes, I was interpreting this bit. Why not wait? Actually, no, we're on the exact same page. Why not wait until we see some more from AI so we can actually have a better idea of what the risks are?
That's right.
Yes.
Yeah. So that is a position that I think is coherent, and I am worried that some people are worried that we might not have that much time, and actually the intelligence explosion is coming soon, like in the next decade. That's what some people would sort of propose.
Yep.
Intelligence explosion coming soon in the next decade. We're not going to get a better chance than this. We better start. We better see. We better try our luck. See if we can come up with something that will solve this problem. Even though it is acknowledged by almost everyone, certainly Eliezer Yudkowsky is very clear that this is a very hard problem, and we are not optimistic that we will solve it, sort of thing. Other people are more optimistic. Eliezer Yudkowsky would then characterize them as naive. Like he thinks that it's actually they're sort of overestimating their ability to sort of, or underestimating the difficulty of the problem. So yeah, to summarize, the landscape is, yes, we're dealing with a lot of uncertainty, and the problem itself, even if we had less uncertainty, is very difficult. It's not clear what the solution should be. So why work on it anyway? Well, I think it's important enough that some people should be working on it, seeing if there are any low-hanging fruits that we can pick, seeing if we can lay the framework that would then be useful by a future generation of workers who are, we've done something that could be useful for them when they have more information. Like trying to build like the infrastructure, maybe you could think of. Like imagine if we get to the point where we don't necessarily know this, but we have 2 years left, and it's now a lot more clear what the systems are going to look like. But it would be great if we had have started thinking about some of the conceptual foundations of the field earlier. That's the work that people are trying to do now.
Yeah, so I can think of an analogy like many things in science are discovered well before there's a practical application for them. So Boolean algebra is one example where it's just completely useless at the time, and then computers come around and it's like, this stuff is great, we can use it for everything. Yeah. So it could be something like that. I still want to see like...
Yeah, I can tell you a little bit about what the specific labs are working on.
I want to quickly say, I respect the hell out of anyone who goes into academia to solve hard problems, because one of the reasons I did not go into academia was because I was like, there's some smart motherfuckers who are already pretty deep in what's going on, and I don't think that I'm as smart as them or as willing to go this deep, and so I'm going to go into I'm going to go make some money in the private sector, and I'll let the super smart people do the academic stuff. So the fact that you have not been scared away from what you've seen in academia is a testament to your, I don't know, intelligence and lack of fear of hard problems. But yeah, so I want to get that out of the way as a sign of just respect to anyone who's almost crazy enough to go and look at the AI problem and be like, yep, you know what? We can nail this down and we can make sense about this conceptually, because if you can pull that off, it's like respect, because that's like it's a big if. But please go on to say what you're going to say.
Yeah, well, if I can briefly comment about academia, so you said you are not as smart as these like leaders who are sort of doing the
like Eliezer Yudkowsky, for example. Yeah. You read the sequences, he's like, holy fuck, this guy's smart.
Yeah,
and it's like, I'm never going to be writing blog posts like that.
Well, the other reason you said was you don't want to get deep enough. And it is very deep. Like, I mean, from being now... So I've done a bachelor's degree where I didn't have a lot of exposure to research, and then a part-time master's degree where I had a lot of exposure to research. And I'm now starting to get to the point where I can see how much I don't know and how deep it goes, like, to get to the front of any particular field. And it is very deep. Damn. So I understand that. But I do think that counterfactually, if you have gone in this direction, you probably would have been able to like be a leading light eventually.
I appreciate that.
All right. Anyway, about the field, what particular labs are doing. So there's a couple of different categories, and we can start with MIRI because that's what you mentioned. So MIRI is working on mostly, I don't know exactly everything they're working on. They don't publish a lot actually now. They used to more, and I think they've gone a little bit dark now. Okay. And maybe it's because they don't think they have something sort of very useful to share, or maybe it's for information hazard reasons. They basically think that actually sharing this information would be counterproductive because it, for example, would help people build more intelligent systems sooner, and that would be a bad outcome for them. They work on agent foundations, from what I can gather. Agent foundations is a kind of theoretical field that encompasses decision theory, sort of decision theory is sort of a way to summarize a lot of it, you know, parts of logic and AI where you're worried about modeling the world, and foundational questions about, you know, what is an agent, for example, what would an optimal decision-making agent be like the ultimate mathematically optimal AI system, what would that be like? If we can have that model and we can make that safe, then we're in good shape. Because hopefully anything that can make that's like as intelligent as you can be, anything that could make that safe could hopefully also work on something less intelligent. There's a couple of other labs and independent researchers who work on agent foundations as sort of that's a very mathematical, technical, abstract approach to the problem that doesn't focus a lot on the details of modern systems. Partly maybe because some of the people working on this don't think that modern systems are actually going to get us there. They're going to maybe make huge advances and change the world, but they might not explode into an intelligence explosion. I don't know what to think about whether or not the current systems, you know, where agent foundations is going, but that's appealing to me because, you know, I can use my background in computer science, theoretical computer science and mathematics, is sort of well placed to contribute to agent foundations work. The question is, am I just then finding something that's convenient for me to work on because like I like those kind of problems, or is it actually going to go anywhere? And that's unclear. But
I mean, I wouldn't worry about that too much. Like, play to your strengths, and it's a cool problem. You know, like if you can contribute to that actually becoming important in saving the world, that's like the coolest thing possible.
Well, it needs to be, because it's unlikely, right, that any particular pathway, any particular life that I live is going to save the world. So I think I have to be happy with something like this has a non-trivial chance of saving the world, and I can take solace in. Even if it eventually doesn't, I don't have regrets because it was like a good bet to make or something like that. And I'm not sure how good a bet it is, because if I'm wary that I might just be like getting sniped, like chasing a cool problem because it like appeals to my mathematical puzzle solver part of my brain.
And it has that hero element where it's
I can be like, oh look, I'm saving AI safety.
I saved the world, guys.
I'm saving the world from AI.
Yeah.
But you know, I have to be actually honest about its potential to do that, and I'm not yet sure about that. I think it's worth thinking more about personally for me. And you know, then it's like maybe I could do something that's a little bit more out of my wheelhouse, but I could spend some time and kind of upskill in it that could be more directly have a better chance of making impact, even incorporating the opportunity cost that I pay by spending a little bit of time adapting myself, learning something new. And we don't on short timelines, which is, you know, some probability on this, we don't have that much time, so that cost could be quite high. Anyway, that's one sort of cluster. Miri is also, I think, that Eliezer Yudkowsky has come out recently as quite pessimistic about the whole sort of problem of AI safety. Basically thinks we're doomed, and like the only thing that we can do left. Basically says, we had a chance. It could have been easier than it was. It turns out there were no low-hanging fruit that we could pick that would solve the problem, so we're all going to die. The only thing left to do now is try and be dignified about it. Not everyone agrees with that.
It's such a crazy
It's quite unhealthy,
statement.
I think, to buy that.
I can't tell if it's a PR stunt or if he actually believes it. Maybe he's saying that to convince people to work on it harder because he thinks it actually is possible to do it. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's just such a...
It could be.
It's a big deal if he actually believes it.
He also says that he's kind of like spent basically his youthful energy on this, and he no longer can like go on. Like he's sort of burnt out of it, so he's like, fuck, retiring or something. I'm not sure if he's retiring, but yeah.
This is like if it's like if John Carmack was like, guys, actually, it's probably a bad example because he's actually working on AI now. But like, if John Carmack was like, guys, I tried to make an even better 3D rendering engine for 3D games to get even higher frame rate. It's beyond me. I can't do it. And then for me to be like, I reckon I could probably do that. Like, it's like,
yeah,
no fucking way. So again, anyone who tries to do AI safety when Eliezer is like, I'm out of ideas. It's like, you got big balls trying to fill those shoes.
Yeah, well, not sure how successful I'm going to be, but gotta do something. So that's one extreme. Basically, they're considered to be quite that's considered to be quite an extreme viewpoint, and it might be a correct viewpoint, but yeah, the rest of the field sort of says, there's Miri's views, which is quite extreme in some way about it. There are other labs who think they have more of a chance, maybe, or I don't know if they sort of like personally really believe that or whatever, but anyway, they're trying something, and a lot of them are working with current systems like the large language models. And so, for example, there's maybe this is the other end of the spectrum. There's OpenAI and DeepMind and Anthropic. These are the three leading AI labs. DeepMind is in London. It's a subsidiary of Alphabet or maybe of Google. I'm not sure exactly what the structure is, but yeah, it's in bed with Google. OpenAI was started by Elon Musk. It's the source of, I don't think he's involved with it anymore. It's the source of ChatGPT, the obviously most famous example. And also they got some funding and access to compute from Microsoft, and then Microsoft extracted their teeth in the form of the chatbot that they put into Bing Chat that is now powering that new feature where you can have your search results summarized with links. And it was also went viral a few weeks ago for becoming unhinged and threatening to kill people and
that unhinged stuff.
Yeah,
let's quickly talk about that for a second, because anytime a AI like ChatGPT or whatever comes out, a bunch of journalists who want to make a story about how it's dangerous will go and just poke as many holes as possible until it starts saying something threatening, something like that.
Yeah.
And it always just falls flat to me. I'm just like, come on, guys. Like, you're misinterpreting what's actually happening here.
Yeah.
It's just saying words, and it doesn't really bother me that much. On the other hand, you could say, well, okay, let's just extrapolate to the future when AIs actually become agents and can actually do things.
Yeah.
Some journalist could also, in that case, go and tell it to make me a coffee, but don't kill anyone, wink, wink, and it could kill some people. So maybe I don't know the right way to respond to what I'm seeing, because I feel like ChatGPT, I feel like anyone using Bing search results, you have to be like such an idiot to not realize it's a fallible AI, and to be like the idea. And I know that this is a big thing that I believe, which is that people aren't that gullible, and the ones who are gullible, you shouldn't spend any time trying to address that problem, because it's just like, otherwise you can't do anything, because it's just like, well, what if some gullible person sees this on the internet and then goes and kills people? Like, there's just always this hypothetical person who might take something the wrong way or whatever. That's my take on the whole chatbot Bing thing.
Okay.
But
yeah, well, the main thing that I pick out of that I think is really important is that, the where you said that these systems can in the future potentially be in a position where making them go deranged can have really harmful consequences. Like, for example, if you have a character personality in your self-driving car that actually has some bearing over where it steers, you could, by prompting it in the right way, basically radicalize it and make it go on a murder spree. And like, that is, the fact that that's a possibility is the problem here, I think. And basically the takes on this whole saga. Okay, so I think prompt engineering, which is what these people are doing, these journalists, they're trying to find out how can you get inside this thing's skin or something like that. Like, how can you send it off the rails?
It's like jailbreaking it.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good analogy. But it sort of shows the fact that this is possible. What it shows is that the companies that are deploying these models haven't yet fully mastered them. They're not fully in control.
Sure.
And at the moment, they're in control at the end of the day because they can pull the plug, because this system isn't adversarially capable. Like, it doesn't have that potential to hurt them. But imagine if you had a system like this, built with the same architecture, using the same sort of safety techniques of the current state of the art, which is what I'm going to talk about what these labs do. You then have it in a position where it is given more power, and then it abuses that power because it becomes a psychopath. And that's the risk. Basically, it's pointing out that we still don't control these things. It's like jailbreaking something that wasn't secure in the first place, and by jailbreaking it, you've created a murderer or something like that in the future.
So I suppose someone might say, like, okay, fair enough, OpenAI was not able to stop ChatGPT from saying certain things.
I think probably the blame is probably more appropriate to attribute it to Microsoft. That's my reading of the situation, is that Microsoft got the system, maybe skipped some steps that OpenAI wouldn't have, and it was even more fragile than ChatGPT.
Okay, I assumed that with ChatGPT, though, they also had similar deals. Like, ChatGPT
you can still prompt engineer it, and you can still get it to say things that its designers didn't intend for it to be able to be sort of jailbroken in that way. But Microsoft's AI went real nuts and like said some really wild things.
Okay.
It was even worse.
Okay. So you could say, fair enough, they failed to put in sufficient safety checks. You could also say maybe they didn't try too hard because it's like they actually didn't think it was going to be that big of a deal. Like, you're dealing with an AI. I assume if you use it, there's a disclaimer saying this is just an AI. Don't take it too seriously.
I haven't looked at I can't confirm with the Microsoft Bing search, but ChatGPT very prominently displays sort of like some example prompts, some limitations, and one of them is, I mean, it's like, you can't trust anything this says, basically.
Yeah.
It may sometimes generate incorrect outputs, and it's like, well, thanks. Like, I mean, it's not necessarily actually like a helpful disclaimer or a constructive disclaimer, but yeah, they're at least legally like not culpable for the ways that you like rely on it.
Yeah, but I guess my point is that there's two ways to look at this. One is the one that you put forward, where you say, well, they tried to add some safety checks and they were easily broken through, right?
Yeah.
And therefore, we shouldn't trust these people to go and make the next level because then they'll similarly be lazy with the safety checks. But another way of looking at it is just like, well, maybe the reason they were lazy was because it just doesn't actually matter. Like, at this point in time, because the AI is not powerful, who cares if it thinks that Barack Obama is dead or something like that?
Well, that's a good point. I don't think I have that intuition about like the situation. I think it's more likely to be the case that they have sort of tried their best.
I suppose if there's evidence that they really do care, right? Which actually wouldn't surprise me. Like, let's say the people are being like, we're turning this on for the entirety of the world. Let's not add any medical misinformation, right? Because then people might go and kill themselves with some bad medication, something like that. So if they really were thinking about that kind of shit, which you would hope that a company like Microsoft would be thinking about, and then they weren't able to actually instate that, then I think your original point holds a lot more water.
Yeah, I think I'm not sure about Microsoft, but if we talk about OpenAI, that's my reading of the situation, is that they have some corporate incentives to sort of build these powerful systems, be the one in the lead and everything. But there are also people, including some of the like high ups, who are at least cognizant of AI safety, and they have a safety team as a division of the AI sort of research structure there. Part of the team is specialists in safety, and they've been the ones who have been entrusted to try and do their best to bring these systems in line. I think they have an incentive. Those people have an intrinsic motivation, that might be similar to mine. Like, they really want to make this AI stuff go well and not destroy the world. And they're trying to do this as a practice run. Like, a lot of the people at these labs are from the effective altruism, rationalist sort of scene. They are sort of post on less wrong and stuff. Even sort of the high ups, like Jan Leica is the head of, actually, I might be getting this wrong in terms of like whether he works at OpenAI DeepMind. So I'll abandon trying to like read out the structure. We could fact check that later. But like there are people in these teams who are indeed like posting on the alignment forum and less wrong and like a part of this this field that is like worried about AI safety. The other thing is that if you remember when Google had released some AI thing and it was like classifying black people as gorillas, and like people got really mad about that.
What? How have I not heard about that?
I think
black people as gorillas.
I think it was like an image classification feature that they were demonstrating as like an advance in AI, and it would sort of label pictures of like what is in this picture, and this example came up and people got really mad about
like there was just part of like a demo they're doing in front of like an audience,
either a demo or it was a tool they released to the public, and then people could use it, and they found this particular corner case. It wasn't like it was they're presenting this at a
that would be just like career ending if you were in front of like in a conference somewhere.
I'm sure they had like demos like this, but they would have maybe cherry picked the examples to be more impressive. But anyway, people find these kind of corner cases where the system doesn't behave as intended, and people get really mad about it. And okay, so one take on it is that all attention is like good in the end because it drives engagement and stuff. Even if it's like bad PR, it's actually good PR or something. I don't know. Maybe Microsoft is cynical. I doubt that. They're also trying to like generate intention.
Microsoft,
for their
they're pretty woke.
Well, maybe. Yeah. Anyway. Well, they weren't doing
nothing against woke people.
They weren't doing.
It's a legitimate belief system.
Gorilla thing. It's Sydney being deranged and like threatening to murder people. So it's like it's not like a social justice warrior is going to get upset about that. It's like more like an AI safety warrior. The equivalent is going to potentially say, "Oh no, like you're like creating Skynet kind of thing."
Well, I know that with DALL-E there was concerns about diversity because most people in stock photos are white for whatever reason. Yeah,
you see these systems generate like show me a picture of a nurse in front of a hospital and it's like invariably a
female nurse,
white nurse usually, and show me a doctor, it's a male, and people say, well, that's not an appropriate stereotype for this system to be kind of echoing, because that reinforces the stereotype.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's like a social justice variant of this control issue, because the people at these companies would like to be more politically correct so that they can have more market share or whatever. Like they don't want to be seen in a bad light, I guess.
Well, yeah, but it may not even be that cynical. It might just be like the
employees
probably actually care about this stuff.
A lot of them, right, okay.
Many people at these companies are like, if you're talking about Google, they're like immigrants from India or something like that, and they're just like, what the hell? We're making a bunch of white images of white people. Like, what gives?
Okay, that's fair enough. Anyway, so we can maybe talk a little bit about what OpenAI is actually doing in terms of the safety research that they're doing and like how these systems are. So they've produced this ChatGPT system, OpenAI in this case. DeepMind also has their own language models, and Anthropic is mainly doing, they're mainly also training, they're like a purely safety team. So DeepMind is like, we want to solve intelligence and we want it to be safe. OpenAI is, we want to solve intelligence and we want it to be safe and open, although I guess they've recently changed how they feel about it being open.
Meaning they're exactly the same?
I guess they're the same. I mean, it's different. They're competitors. So yeah. And then Anthropic is like, we want AI systems to be safe.
They don't care about making it happen.
We think intelligence is going to be solved, and we want to make sure it's safe. Like that is their primary objective. Whereas
Anthropic, are they owned by anyone?
Okay, well, it's interesting. So it was started by I think Dario Amodei and a few other people. I'm not sure the full list of kind of founders. I think Chris Olah is there. He does like interpretability research. Have you heard of any of these people?
No.
Anyway, okay, maybe some people have in the audience. But you can characterize them as a bunch of people who used to work at places like DeepMind and Google Brain and OpenAI, and then decided to start their own organization. And they've got funding. They're a non-profit, I think. They've got funding now from Google, and some people are worried, or at least I've heard, like it's a possibility that this will set them up in a similar relationship between Microsoft and OpenAI, where they now are kind of not able to have
interest.
To have full control over like what they do with the systems that they train. Maybe Google will like eventually take over and like go against their safety wishes or something. But anyway, they're nominally independent.
Yeah. I can imagine the Google project manager being like, if you could just sign off on this thing we're releasing next week, that'd be fantastic, because we got a lot of people waiting on this. So.
Yeah. So what I was going to say is these labs kind of they're a bunch of machine learning engineering and machine learning research talent goes into building these systems and then running experiments on them in terms of trying to prompt engineer them, trying to see, well, measure their capabilities and measure their capability to do sort of harmful things and try and find ways to like stop them from doing harmful things, trying to understand and control these systems. So this is the safety teams I'm talking about at OpenAI, DeepMind, and Anthropic, which all of Anthropic, safety teams at OpenAI, safety teams at DeepMind. So they are sort of trying to push forwards the architectures that we're using, like the technology itself, to have more and more capabilities because they want to eventually sort of bring AI into the world for good. But then they also have teams that are trying to understand and sort of learn how to control these systems. That's the other end of the sort of spectrum from MIRI. And I guess I would point out that MIRI maybe would, I don't want to put words in their mouth, obviously, maybe they would say something like, it would be better if we slowed down on AI or whatever. The people over here are more like, no, we need to go as fast as possible because if we're not the ones that build the AI systems and we do it responsibly because we've got safety teams, then Facebook AI research is going to be, they're only like 2 years behind us or 6 months behind us. I don't know exactly what the estimate is, but they're going to then be the leader and they don't care about safety at all. So we're screwed.
Man, this is depressing.
It's like a race dynamic.
Exactly. This is just a game theory trap.
Yeah.
Where everyone is like, we got to be as fast as possible because anyone else would be much worse at it than us.
Yes. So that's one way to characterize the current kind of competitive landscape is they feeling a lot of these race pressures. And that's something that people in early days of AI safety were quite worried about happening. And it's like a prediction of, something that could make the problem worse that has come true.
And I guess it makes sense just because AI has such promise to do good things. Right, like there's profit to be made because people want this thing because it's awesome. If you can talk to ChatGPT and it can help you do your taxes, like that's fucking fantastic.
Yeah.
So
for everyone except for tax agents, like accountants.
Well, do they really like their job that much? I don't know.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah. They
I wouldn't
might
enjoy
not
being
like
a
their
tax
job,
agent.
but like it's
They
one
would
thing
like
to say-
having a job.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, like the taxi drivers who spent their entire life memorizing London, like is the example where there's like research about how like the hippocampus like changed physically as these taxi drivers like learned the streets of London. Like there's a lot of effort that goes into like learning how to be a good taxi driver, and then this whole disruption kind of comes along and just makes that now like no longer like the same position in society. I actually don't know what happened. I didn't follow it. Like I don't know what happened to like the majority of taxi drivers. Whether I still see taxis around here. So
well, we haven't really done. Wait, were you talking about the whole Uber disruption?
Uber, yeah.
Oh, I assume most of them just went and got a job at Uber.
Well, possibly. I mean, it's not as good a job. You don't have, because taxi drivers would have had a lot more kind of corporate power as workers than Uber drivers who were basically gig workers.
Yep, that's true.
So it's a demotion.
It's a demotion, but it's a much better product. Actually, I can't speak for New York taxi drivers. Maybe that was a good system, but like, like back in the day, you get in a taxi, it smelled like crap. Now I'm sitting there, it's fucking, it's got, it smells fresh. They give me a free water. I'm like, this is fucking awesome. And all because they got a review system where I can say this guy is actually a 2-star because his car smells. That's a big deal.
Yeah, I mean, obviously this is the kind of, this is the cost of innovation or something. It's like there's going to be whoever was, the incumbent is going to be, they've been made obsolete, and we don't necessarily have the institution set up to to make that fair on them, because they've, the social contract kind of says you got to come into society, you got to pick a career. It doesn't really matter what you pick, pick something that kind of fits your interest or whatever these days. Obviously in the past it was more kind of rigid, but pick something, whatever suits your interest, sort of be good at that, be a good person, and then we will take care of you. You'll work for this time and then you get to retire. You won't have to work all the time. You'll get time to, pursue your own interests. You get weekends and stuff. Taxi drivers, maybe it's a little different, whatever. But I'm sure they still get breaks. But then, disruptions come along and say these people who were sort of in this you've devoted your life to this path, and now, sorry, we don't need that, so we're just going to end the contract with you here and not get you through all the way. So, you could probably just reskill and or get another job or whatever.
I agree that is a problem. The solution is definitely not to just keep dying industries afloat indefinitely.
Right. Yes.
You have to just have an off-ramp so that you're not going straight into poverty.
Yeah.
But I suppose it is probably worth diving into like the AI side of things because like let's say that
if we're going to move on to that, I'll maybe just briefly summarize what I see as other than this end with OpenAI and so on, and the end with Miri. There's a couple of other groups that are trying to do particular tasks that are kind of more empirical, like machine learning research focused on current systems. So there's a couple that are sort of fill in this space in between. A couple that come to mind is Redwood Research, which is in California, and I think is closer to the Miri end, but also builds sort of large systems. They're actually physically close to Miri as well, although I guess that's not really doesn't have necessarily that much bearing on their sort of.
They might get coffee together. Who knows?
Yeah, I don't know exactly what the relationship is there. There's a couple of academic teams. So Stuart Russell's CHAI, Center for Human Compatible AI. Is one at Berkeley. There's they're kind of like training PhD students that are working on particular techniques for controlling these systems. Oh yeah, I didn't talk about that, but the main one is has come out over the last few years is the idea that you can try to use, instead of specifying an objective for the AI system by writing down a function that takes a state and then produces a reward, and it's like some kind of like programmer trying to capture what is a happy person or something like that. There's an approach that you can try and use machine learning to learn that function instead. So you can, it's called value learning or reward learning, where you try to have data based on human behavior, like what humans do or what they say they like, or you get them to make comparisons between things. This is better than that, and you actually get humans to produce this data, and then you learn a function over that sort of tries to say, well, what is it that humans seem to be liking? And there are a lot of philosophical maybe issues with this that we can talk about if you want to go in that direction, in terms of like, what do you actually, when you ask someone to make a comparison between two things, what are you actually getting there? Is it really what they want at the end of the day? Like,
right, because people might not say what they really want,
or they might, you got to be careful what you read into the human data, like where it's come from, what the context is. Like, for example, Facebook likes are not necessarily endorsements of
everyone on Twitter has to say that retweets are not endorsement.
Yeah,
I think I made my Twitter handle like retweets like are explicitly endorsements or something like that. Like, my opinions directly reflect the opinion of my employer, something like that.
Yeah.
Anyway,
my one like that is like, it is the opinion of the University of Melbourne that the opinions expressed on this page are not the opinions of the University of Melbourne.
That's very funny. So it actually did occur to me while you were talking about the like training these things on values. We kind of do that with ABC Kids at the moment, where it's like there's a lot of actually, it even goes beyond that. Most shows we watch have morals, and they're trying to communicate what happens when you go against your gut, for example.
Yeah.
Something bad always happens, right? And people, they lie, and then it comes back to bite them. Yeah. And it's interesting. I do wonder if, like, the shows we watch as humans, are they actually teaching us things, or do we find them enjoyable because we know them to already be true, if that makes sense?
Yeah.
Like, if we weren't given all this stuff to watch, would we actually be a less moral society? It's quite possible, I think, that is the case.
Well, I mean, before TV, were we a less moral society?
Probably. But I think we've become more moral over time, in large part because of just, like, institutions, right? Like, an effective police force means people don't go and have gang wars as much and stuff like that. But even before, like, the Bible's a thing, right? There's always been cultural content.
Yes.
Trying to get people to go in the right direction.
One way of looking at religion, other than, like, I mean, people obviously have takes on religion that are like, it's like some dogmatic evil force or whatever. It's
I don't
like
even mind it that
science
much.
Or whatever. But one more charitable way to look at it is that it fills that role in society. It's an institution for how to live. And science is like an institution for, like, what you can do, and religion is more like what you should do, or something like that.
So normative versus
Descriptive.
Or descriptive, yep.
Yeah.
Yes. Did I just derail something you were going to say?
So I guess we're talking about, you were reflecting on, I guess, the human analogy for value learning. So is that...
I suppose...
I think it's a similar... I agree that there's an analogy there. And I think that value learning research in AI should like learn from that. Should say, well, okay, how do humans do this?
Right. Actually, the point I was going to make was, could you just like show these AIs Sesame Street, and or like and just kind of, I assume Sesame Street has morals to teach people. I've never really watched it that much, but
I remember it being that kind of show. Yeah, I think it's trying to.
That'd be cool. Kind of if you could make an AI intelligent enough to interpret content in a show, like kids show, and then you kind of just like bombard it with a bunch of episodes of like, don't lie, cooperate with people.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, the thing it's a little bit, I think, beyond the realm of what current systems can do to like consume the video like that and actually parse it and make sense of it. But text we're getting pretty good at. So if you either do a transcript or what is the equivalent of this for before TV would have been like stories and stuff. So if you can get some data source of a lot of like moral stories and then present them to the AIs, that would be one. You could learn values from that. Yes.
That's crazy. Wouldn't that be crazy if we had all this really interesting stories and stuff like that, a bunch of moral teachings, and that was not just purely for human use. We ended up, we
solve the alignment problem by like
with some cool stories,
enculturing the AIs. Yeah. I mean, I think that is what I kind of see as the spirit of what can, like, the only thing I see that can work so far is basically. Well, yeah, I would say that my take on the solution to the alignment problem or the AI problem is to kind of shoot for the regime we were talking about before, where the AIs are on our level. They're just sort of like part of our society. They're our equals or something like that. We make them similar enough to us.
Make them identify with us, basically.
Yeah, or make them sort of I think it's like about making the architecture of their minds similar enough that it responds in the same kind of ways that we have tried and true for having a moral culture and like not having a disaster, not having like murderous types too prevalent. And okay, the problem with this is that humans actually aren't perfect. There are a lot of issues that we still haven't solved, and ideally we could get the AIs to kind of help us with that. And if we limit their power, there are things that they won't be able to do. So, there are trade-offs here, but I see it as like a stable, safe solution if we were to kind of create AIs as our equals, make them a bit like us. It raises the question of why are we making the AIs again? We could just make more people or something like that. We already know how to do that, not necessarily how it happens.
There's a similar question of just like, do we really need to continue improving the world that much? Like, maybe we don't. Maybe the hedonistic treadmill is a real thing, and this is all just completely unnecessary.
That's interesting. So by the treadmill, you basically mean that like wherever people are, they're going to be about as happy. It doesn't matter really what their life circumstances are like. I don't know if I buy that because I haven't had experience in like a wide range.
I'm yet to live in Africa.
That's right.
In rural Africa.
Yes. So I don't know. My intuition says like, there's going to be an element of that is right, that, people kind of have a feeling of satisfaction and purpose from making good of whatever circumstance they put in, and like a human's purpose or something that they can like identify with is sort of dealing with new problems that come their way and like sort of living despite, challenges and stuff, overcoming challenges. But we're not going in that direction. I mean, I don't know if that's a feasible target to kind of get a political movement behind and sort of get people to be like, oh, no, world is like right. The right world is fine like the way it is. Like,
I think maybe it's more like I think in the West it seems like people are becoming less happy despite things getting better.
Okay.
So that's kind of behind what my intuition is there. I do think there's plenty of work to be done outside the West. And it could be that an AI is needed to kind of, let's say, solve world hunger.
So you're an imperialist.
We need to basically make the West. We need to push our values on everyone. Basically, is what I'm saying. No, but we do need technologically. If a given country would like world hunger to be saved in their context, then maybe we should try and do that and use AI to do
it. The normal, I think the kind of consensus view on this, I actually don't know much about it, but my intuition is something like development is like the path. Like you got to have it kind of organically develop into like out of poverty or whatever, because if you try and impose something, it won't be stable. you know,
it's like comparing just having capitalism and actual, like, you know, for-profit investment in a country versus foreign aid, where foreign aid is often seen to be actually quite bad compared to just investment money.
So something like, you know, you got to try and figure out how to encourage organic, sustainable, and you know, development. Like this stuff has to grow. It's really hard to design a system, so you got to kind of find a process that grows it organically. And otherwise it's going to be like forced. It's going to be sort of fragile, and it will collapse if you sort of take away the, you know, foreign aid, for example. You could become like dependent on that.
Yep.
So if we could get AI to, you know, we're really not good at designing it, but maybe it is possible to kind of build these things. We're just not competent at it, but maybe AI could be, or something like that. And it could be, or at least it could be a more competent helmsman steering us in like the direction of positive development. And that would be like I would say that would be like a wise way forward from my perspective. Whereas sometimes I think people in AI just think, oh, well, you know, we just need like more capitalism, more stuff to consume, and like everything will be fine. I'm not so sure about that. I mean, I think it probably could head us in a bad direction. I don't know.
Could destroy the planet.
Yeah, well, that's the other thing I was going to say is that so if the proposition is, well, maybe the world is fine the way it is, we certainly have obvious problems that are like existential that we are currently struggling to deal with. Maybe they'll turn out to be okay. Climate change is the obvious one, and you know, our current system is kind of headed towards disaster, you could make an argument. So maybe we need to either get much better at steering the system away from that disaster, solve that problem, or solve AI and then hope that the AI solves all the problems. It's not clear if we can solve some of the problems that we might face without AI, so, you know, like without more intelligence. And so for me, it's like a question of, is more intelligence going to make the problems worse or better?
That's a really good argument, actually. You just go to someone like, do you think humans can solve global warming, assuming that it is, you know, whatever, man-made and it's growing and stuff like that? Like, do you think we can solve all these random problems? It's like, you know, maybe not. But do you think we can make an AI that could solve it? Like, yeah, maybe we could. So that sounds like a strong argument in favor of AI.
Well, that would
except for the fact that you might make an AI that kills everyone.
Yeah, that's right. So yeah, I guess, I mean, I sometimes think that I've got to work on AI because like it is the important problem that is going to like be the determinant over the next few decades of like what happens next. So this is the most important field to be working in. I mean, I think that if I was in a different field, I might feel, you know, similarly about that field. So I think I might be biased, but
maybe
if human level AI, like if AGI, artificial general intelligence, that is sort of equal at intelligence level as humans, is developed soon, that I think is going to be so transformative that it will have been right to be like a part of that, trying to make it better. Well, I guess I could be trying to make it better, but systematically make it worse. I don't know how to rule that out.
You mean accidentally make it worse somehow?
Yeah, like, yeah. There's actually an interesting philosophical argument that says something like, maybe trying to do good actually systematically is bad. Like it makes consequences worse in the end.
You mean in some situations or in all situations?
Maybe that's like just a heuristic that's like general, that's often true, and then it's like counterintuitive, but you wouldn't want to try and be good because it would actually make things worse.
That's a weird maxim to live by. Don't do anything good because you might make things worse.
It's very hard to live by. I mean,
so do
it's
nothing.
Kind of like I don't know.
Be selfish.
Well, it's kind of like a counter to hubris, or like thinking that, you know, like being arrogant and thinking that you can actually, like, you should always remember that there could be unanticipated consequences.
Yeah, but what's the unanticipated consequences of AI safety?
Oh, well, it's easy to think of, people think about this in AI safety. One thing they think about is, well, sometimes if you do safety research, it actually feeds back into capabilities. So by making...
Like an arms race thing.
I'm not sure if it's an arms race. People talk about a race between safety and capabilities, but the specific issue I'm pointing to is that if you're working on safety proposals, what if they inadvertently make the capabilities better, and that accelerates burns the time that we have left to solve the safety problem? So say, let's say, for example, you were working on...
But hang on, but it removes the time we have left to solve the safety problem. that still presupposes there is a safety problem that needs to be solved. And so
Yes.
if you believe that, then it is still worthwhile to work on the safety problem.
Right, because the alternative is don't work on the safety problem.
That's like, right.
You've got as much time as you need, but you don't use it, so the worse outcome. Yeah.
I understand when people are talking about large-scale decisions that are intended to improve the world, that can go badly.
Yeah.
But the large-scale decision is the creation of AI in the first place. Like, that is the big hubristic thing that might destroy everyone.
Yeah.
And things we're doing to kind of dampen the speed at which that progresses just sounds to me like it's just hard to use the same argument against that.
Yeah, I think that's probably right.
So I do want to talk about the effect on society. We were briefly talking about unemployment. People who get disrupted by new technology.
Is like obsolesced is a word where you become obsolescent? You are obsolete.
Well, you're obsolete. Obsoleted? There's no way that's a real
I think it's obsolesced.
Really? Obsolesced.
So to obsolesce is to make something obsolete.
Really?
No, to become obsolete, I guess.
Obsolesced.
No,
Never heard that
I think
word.
it's like to obsolesce something. I think. Anyway, maybe I'm making that up.
I don't feel comfortable. That word does not sit well enough in my mouth. I'm going to use it. But if people become obsolete,
yeah.
I suppose there's a question. Firstly, let's just assume, for the sake of argument, that. Well, actually, let's paint the picture.
Are you talking about individual like industries, or are you talking about when you say if people become obsolete? Do you mean?
I'm not saying all people. I'm just. Okay. Let's for now start with like 10% of the workforce can't find a job.
Mm-hmm.
So
knowledge workers, like people who like do what GPT does. Like
yes,
that's me. So I'm worried about this.
That's me as well. So I suppose maybe we should paint the picture a bit historically. So there was a time where people could go to a factory and pull a lever all day long, and that would pay them a wage, and then that was all good.
Yeah.
And then we had machines that could do that, and now you had to go and do things that required more brains because machines hadn't yet encroached into intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
Now we're in a situation where machines are encroaching into the realm of intelligence, and the question is, what is there left to do? And people will sometimes say things like, well, humans always find a way, and it's funny because not long ago, maybe even a year or two ago, people were saying, well, we'll just do more creative things.
Exactly.
And it's like, guess what? AI came for creative things first, bitch. The one thing humans actually enjoy doing that's work is the thing that's being displaced in the... Anyway, so that's one thing. Another thing to think about is like, we used to have horses, and they were what we used to get from A to B, and now we have cars, and horses were not smart enough to do anything. That really all they were good for was just, being horses and getting us from A to B. Some horses still exist for the sake of like horse racing or farming. Not really farming, but they exist on farms almost recreationally for the sake of the farmer. And
I believe the remainder got turned into dog food or something like that.
Probably, yes. Yep. So the point of me bringing that up is that that's how I think about humans in relation to AI, is that there will be a point where we just like, we got nothing.
So now we are talking about all humans.
Well, so that, for the sake of having the end goal, I think there'll be a point where we're probably going to reach that. Maybe we'll quickly dwell on in the meantime, in the near term.
Yes.
I guess I do worry about how many support... So a lot of people outsource to countries like the Philippines to do like support work, which is kind of like, if you're a support worker, you might be onboarded and it's like, hey, here's a bunch of documentation we have.
Yeah.
And you're now going to take tickets where people are asking questions. Maybe it's usage questions. Maybe there's some bug. And there's kind of like, you consult the documentation, you talk to the client, you ask them to try certain things. And if there's a genuine bug, you escalate it up to like maybe a developer. And I do worry that something like ChatGPT is kind of very well adapted to that exact task.
Yeah.
Because it's just consuming a bunch of documentation. That's like the training set. And then it has a dialogue. And you get to the bottom of something. And your problem is solved.
I would clarify only that the documentation is not necessarily the training set. For these models, they're trained on a very broad corpus of text, like a chunk of the internet and some like books and stuff. And then they might be fine-tuned, which is like a later stage of training where you say, okay, now become a specialist in understanding this particular textual context, which would be the documentation.
That's a good distinction. So we have a training... the training phase, then the fine-tuning phase.
Sometimes it's fine-tuning. Sometimes it's actually, if you have the right kind of model with like enough capacity, you could then say, well, okay, you now predict the next token, but the prompt is going to be all the documentation, and then say, and then something that says, now you are a support worker living in the Philippines, and well, not necessarily, but like whatever. And the human says this, and then it's blank for you to fill in. So it could be part of the prompt or the fine-tuning or potentially the training set.
Okay.
But yeah, anyway.
So, pardon me, all this to say that there are countries that are trying to modernize right now, right? So there are some Western countries that modernized a while back, and we kind of have the first mover advantage. So a lot of smart people come to the West and they contribute to innovation and things like that. But for many countries, they kind of depend on the leftovers, which in many cases is outsourcing and support work and stuff like that.
Yep.
I actually think for people who do manufacturing, they're probably in an okay situation.
Oh yeah, I was going to say that, like, counterintuitive, like you say, the creative, like, it turns out generative AI is like possible, and actually like it's what we solved before robotics, for example. So because Annie, my partner, is a textiles worker, you would think that making clothes would be something that you could automate with a robot, but actually it's really hard. You have to be very dexterous to like move the fabric through the machine. So you have a machine doing a lot of the stitching, but you still require a human's dexterity to and this is what happens in like sweatshops, which my partner is not working in, but
thankfully.
In these third world countries, this is what is happening in those shops there, and they're building sneakers or like sewing these fast fashion clothes and stuff. You have the human dexterity going through the machine, taking the fabric. Because I guess it's because it's like quite actually a unpredictable, like the material is kind of unpredictable, and it would be difficult to have a robot do that, but a human can become very competent at it. So that is, that was maybe something that you would intuitively think is going to be like next in the automation. But it turns out that dexterity has not been, it's at least they've got time left. Before that kind of human dexterity is automated. And
no one saw that one coming.
Yeah.
Maybe some people saw it coming, but I did not see that coming. And it is... I suppose it's a concern for countries where it's like that was their one chance, right? The idea is you do a bunch of knowledge work, and then you modernize, and you can become more consumption-based. But there are countries that are just not there yet, and I don't know how soon it's going to happen. Like, I don't know how soon ChatGPT will get so good that we don't need support staff.
Yeah,
it may be like decades away.
I think that's actually my prediction would be that particular task that you described is like coming up soon, like next couple of years actually.
Shit.
So
well,
because you already get decently reliable results when you ask this particular system, which hasn't been fine-tuned on this task, about I ask it something like, how can I use R, the programming language?
Yeah.
I don't need to say the programming language. How can I use R to write a script to do this? And it will give me a script. And it's like, that is kind of, it has read at some point in its training data a bunch of stuff about R, maybe some code. It has got enough of an understanding to like go and fetch the retrieval, the information retrieval that is happening. There's some routing and stuff going on in here. So if you could then plug that into, what Bing has done is basically said, well, we're going to superpower these machines by basically saying, you don't have to do the retrieval. We're experts in retrieval. We have done all the computer science for the last few decades. And we've got all the algorithms that can like index the web and give us good results very quickly, like a very efficient algorithm. So we're going to sort of supercharge this model and just have it, it does its own kind of internal retrieval, and it knows like the context, and then it uses that to kind of present this information intelligently to the user. So the way you described this tech support job, it's basically, most of them follow like a script, right?
Many of them
and
do,
there are certain instances where it's like, okay, well, now we're in a situation where we're outside of the bounds of the script, so I'm going to escalate you to someone. And that could also happen, is that you could have this as the first layer.
Yes.
Where it becomes to know, it comes to know when, like, its own capabilities enough to know when it should escalate to someone with more information or more experience or whatever. But maybe you won't have as many as you currently do at that next tier. Humans employed, that is.
And it's a similar story with Copilot. So GitHub Copilot is a tool that it's kind of like actually pretty similar to ChatGPT. You just type some code and it will suggest what you're intending to do afterwards. And it's been hugely helpful to me on a daily basis.
I watched you doing one of the streams that you have online, and that was actually probably the first time that I've seen Copilot being used, and that was impressive.
It's awesome. It's fantastic. Just as a quick aside, it's cool when you can just like type a comment saying, "I'm about to do this," and then it's actually not me who does it. It's Copilot. But people talk about that, and the consensus is like, well, we still need senior developers to do senior things, but junior developers, maybe we don't need them so much. And it's the same story as with some of these developing countries, where it's like, if only they had just gotten to that point where they could now be okay, but they weren't quite there, and so we don't need them anymore.
Well, you will eventually need, if this equilibrium is stable enough for this to go through like a few decades, you will eventually need new senior developers to be trained. But
we have to
separately solve that problem. Yeah, that's right. These senior developers were once junior developers. Maybe they can do like an apprenticeship thing, but there won't be necessarily as many. Although, I don't know, like, do you get your senior developers by weeding out all the shitty junior developers?
Yes.
Maybe that would be a little bit more difficult if you don't have the sort of the experiment that you run with your junior development. Like your junior development team, you can think of as a workforce and also a kind of
selection pool.
Yeah, selection pool. That if you don't have as broad a selection pool because you got rid of all your junior developers, maybe you won't find good senior developers. Although there probably only has to be a couple of these selection pools to generate enough senior developers that can then go around to different companies. I don't know.
That's a good point, though, in that it is now harder to evaluate. Like, obviously, you need different skills when you go from junior to mid-tier to senior.
Yeah.
And one of the ways you might appraise somebody who's at the junior level is like, well, are they writing good code? It's well tested.
Yeah.
And maybe the answer is now yes, but only because they were good at prompting an AI to do it for them. And they weren't really... And so therefore, when they get to the stages where an AI is not really able to help you, just because of where it currently is at, you fall flat.
Yeah, that's interesting. Actually, I haven't really thought about the that second function of this kind of like structure of like training people, basically. But yeah, it's interesting. I mean, companies will experiment with this, and we'll see whether or not it works. And also, the other thing is the AI keeps advancing and might also be able to solve some of the problems that it creates. So, for example, you could use AI to both train and evaluate developers to be the best version of themselves, maybe even pushing them beyond what the AI itself can do. But maybe like a good teacher, it can teach you to become like the most powerful version of yourself beyond even their own capabilities.
Yeah. I mean, it's just using ChatGPT to write code for me has just been it's been a time saver, a huge time saver.
Yeah.
And just you think about the economic implications of that. Like, well, one thing actually people may not know about the world of development, like software development, is that we have a fucking shit ton of work that needs to be done, and we're not struggling to find work to do. It's just like if my company could hire like 200 developers, we would do that if we had the money to do
like.
Yeah, like good enough developers. Like if we, because there's just so much shit to do, and we're constantly just like, we would love to do this, but we don't have the people to do it, so we got to choose this very narrow thing. And so
it's not just junior developers though. Like you also need coordinators.
Yes.
Because when you're building software, it has to be coordinated, or it just falls apart. Right?
Yeah, that's true.
So I think it's sort of difficult to scale the effort, or it's at least not trivial.
Yes, that is true. That's a good point. But my point is that if we did live in a world where we were like perfectly matched, right? Where it's like, well, we would get no real benefit from adding more developers right now, even if we had the money, right? In that world, when the current developers become much more effective, then we need to get rid of a bunch of people because we don't need them.
Yeah.
But in a world where you have an ocean of shit that has to be done, if you can pay the same amount of money and your developers can become more effective, that's just great.
Yeah.
It's just a good thing. You can get through more work, you generate more profit. It's not the case that you actually need to be letting go anybody.
Yeah.
I know we've had layoffs recently just because the economy is not doing great, but that's kind of nothing to do with AI at the moment.
That's more like the company has less money and can't afford to have so many developers, even though if they had more money, they would spend it on the developers.
Yeah. Okay. So I think there is. I wonder how much that applies to other things. Like I think that is not the same with, say, support, because you have to hire the right number of people to kind of get your number of tickets down to roughly zero.
Yeah.
Periodically,
whatever response rate you're aiming for. Yeah. Okay. So that's interesting. I don't know if I have much to say on that, but it suggests both of these things suggest to me an analogy. So you will be aware of when over the last, I don't know, decade or two, people have gone to infrastructure as a service. So, for example, Amazon Web Services, where basically instead of a tech company running servers and so on, you would have in-house previously like a data center which runs your database, and you would have servers there that were sort of actually serving your website. But this has moved to Amazon basically doing all of that actual, like maintaining all of the actual data centers, and there are a couple of others than Amazon, but it's the prime example. And one of the big benefits of this is that it becomes scalable. You can basically have elastic, hardware and sort of capacity to do whatever computation you're doing, scaling on demand. So when you have a lot of users, you instantly sort of automatically expand the number of servers that you're using. And when you have not so many, you shrink it down. And so you save costs by this because you only pay for what you actually use. So one analogy is to the software developers. If now your software developers are basically instances of a language model like or a programming language model like Copilot, which by the way is GitHub, which is Microsoft, which is linked to OpenAI. So GPT is like coming through that pipeline and is going to be in Copilot like at some point probably. Like
I thought it was the same thing.
I think it's an earlier version that is powering, or it's like it might be called Codex, OpenAI Codex. It's like it's like a GPT that is tuned for code rather than for natural language. Anyway, the advancements and like the size increases that are also powering improvements in GPT are going to eventually power improvements and make the Copilot kind of style systems more powerful. Anyway, so if you have these systems, if you have a scalable workforce, then it's like you can, when it comes to layoff, that's easy because you just sort of scale down the number of GPTs.
And so, the GPTs don't complain.
Well, they don't complain. It's
because they're dead.
An open question whether or not they're alive. I think some people speculate that it depends. Well,
they're dead once you turn them off.
Well, that's true.
Yeah.
It's a question of whether
they were alive in the first place.
That's sort of fair, or exactly. I don't think we want to go into that.
No.
That's another conversation.
Agreed.
I'm studying philosophy of mind actually this semester. I'm auditing a class at the university while I'm working there.
That's cool.
And I'm planning to sort of go through it with this sort of lens of trying to understand what a person who understands what I do about machine learning makes of all this philosophy. And so far it's very interesting. But anyway, back on track. So also, I mean, it's similar. Like this sort of scalability of workforce is then similar to the support scenario, where if you had the ability to just scale up the number of servers that you were, as in service people, but in this case models that you were using, that seems like it would be useful because then you don't have to employ
a bunch of people who might not have anything to do on a given day because there's just not many tickets that day.
Yeah, that's right. So it would be more responsive to the demand, and you could save costs like that. Yes. And that's even if the cost of doing it this way is on parity with the cost of having a human do it, which is at some point that's probably going to become much cheaper actually to do it through the language models. Yeah,
and I should say that there already are companies that have where an employee of that company is actually doing support for several other client companies, and so they are kind of in a pool similar to a pool of compute resources from AWS.
Cool. Yeah,
but it's harder. It's hard because a human has only so many brain cells, and you can't really get a good grasp on the documentation of a bunch of different services. Like some companies do it, but it's like often you just hire your own support people.
Yeah, so maybe this will start us heading towards the more eventually everyone is going to be obsolete sort of direction. Are you familiar with Amazon Mechanical Turk?
Yes.
So this is the system where basically it's like Amazon Web Services, but instead of your job going to a server, it goes to a human who is then, their job is basically to log onto this website, look at jobs, get a summary of the job, and then do it, like through the computer interface or whatever, and give you a response, and then they get paid for that. So people use this for example, psychology experiments, to get a large amount of data by running a survey, for example. They will say, we'll pay you like however many dollars to spend some time filling in this survey about you as a person.
Interesting.
And that's a way that psychologists sometimes collect like large data sets with which to do analysis on their theories of psychology, of personality, or like whatever else they're interested in.
Obviously, that'll be selection bias effects that I'm going to worry about.
They like part of the literature also looks into that and finds that, you can get sometimes reliable data from this in some contexts, and like, if you ask the questions in a particular way, and if you like make sure there are no bots answering your survey, like you can do it well, and it's comparable with the kind of experiments that we ran before, where we went to the general population, or more often, the honors psych students and the undergrads who are at the university where the psychologists work, and they get them to do these surveys. So yeah, some progress in psychology, I understand, has come from this, and I'm actually going to run a similar survey as part of my explainable AI research project at the moment at the university, which will be on, because you can use humans to evaluate explainability tools. You can say, well, how helpful was this evaluation, or you can provide them with a model and then get them to answer some questions about it or make some predictions about it or whatever. And then you can provide another person with the model plus an explanation and see if they do better on average in this group versus the first group without the explanation. So anyway, this was all to say that maybe what humans will be good at enough to, save them as a job after the AIs take over everything else is being Turkers.
Filling out surveys.
Filling out surveys, because especially if you do this kind of reward learning, is your way of making these AI systems, know what they're going to have an incentive to find out what it is like that the humans prefer. And so we could all end up basically just the equivalent of like sitting on a little Facebook newsfeed in a pod somewhere where all of our sort of bodily needs are taken care of by the fully automated economy outside, and we have social breaks and stuff. But we just scroll on the newsfeed and press like or dislike on things that come across, and the AI is like, no, I'm really getting it. This is great. Yeah.
Like, do you prefer Coke or Fanta? Like Fanta, and it's just like, I've been giving you Coke for the last 10 years. Like, yeah, appreciate that. It's because you're a Fanta. So, okay, So we've established that life will be tricky for quite a few people as AI gets better, even in a narrow sense. Even
people who thought they would be safe because they were doing sort of like very human things. And it's true that the AI might not be able to do it in a human way, but if we don't ask for it to, the economy is not necessarily concerned with being human. It's concerned with like making money and stuff. So.
Even art, like there's this band I continually I'm constantly listening to and talking about this band Deaf Heaven I've been listening to.
What's the name?
Deaf Heaven. It's like a shoegaze / metal band.
Okay.
But I was thinking about like, it's been a couple years since they released an album. I'm like, I wouldn't mind if they released a new album, because I listen to these guys. It's unhealthy addiction at this point.
Yeah.
And I'm like, if there was an AI that was like DALL is pretty impressive in terms of making visual images.
Yeah.
If there was an AI that could just make music to the same level of fidelity as DALL-E makes images, and I could just tell him, could just make the next Deaf Heaven album for me, then I reckon that might be enough. Like, it wouldn't surprise, like, whether it actually came from Deaf Heaven, the band, or whether it came from an AI emulating them, I have a feeling it won't bother me.
Okay, yeah. So I have an interesting, I guess, take on this. Yeah, I mean, the scenario I imagine is similar, but you're not, like, eventually it's the AIs themselves that like cultivate a creative kind of theme that they've got going, and that becomes a band, and you sort of just subscribe to a 24/7 stream from this source of music that is just interestingly variant enough, and like repeats some of the classics that have been liked that it's previously generated, with maybe even like subtle twists. Like, live music is probably more interesting to listen to than recorded, because although part of what you're doing when you're listening to music is kind of anticipating what is going to happen sonically, there's also so you also get novelty is also valuable in music. Anyway, so you'll potentially be, not necessarily you, but like your child or whatever grows up in a world where this is an option, and the music scene is basically like, which channels do you subscribe to, which AI artists do you subscribe to, and like possibly even more differentiated than that, it can like learn how you respond to the music and tune it just individually for you. Yeah. So you could be, part of music is sort of sharing it culturally.
It's like a TikTok for music.
Yeah. Anyway, so some people would maybe agree with you that say, I think I could find the enjoyment that I find in music from music generated by an AI. Others might disagree because I think they read more into music. They would say that actually it matters that the music came from a human. It's an expression of their emotions.
Suffered in a certain way.
I'm connecting with them. Yeah, and I don't feel they would intuitively think they can't feel like that with an AI. And maybe it's true they can't feel like that with an AI that's the equivalent of TikTok. If maybe some AI in some future scenario could be like human enough to like connect with them emotionally. But yeah, I think people might say that actually, if you're just after music to study too, that's sort of just occupying your ears, that could work. But maybe, I mean, I'm not a musician, but I know also people who practice music and get very serious about it. There's like a lot of emotional sort of passion and stuff that goes into the music. And
I think those people aren't being imaginative enough about, let's imagine a world where it's like, we're talking about indistinguishable.
Yeah, okay.
Right?
Including the emotional aspect.
Right. You got a guy who's just like, fuck! And you're just like, wow, that really relates to my experience. But it's actually just an AI-generated thing.
Yeah, okay. So I think some people would still say the source matters.
Yes.
And it's about it generalizing. It's like you can connect with a human because you are similar to them in certain ways or something like that. And you're very different from the AI. So maybe it's like, it feels fake or something like that. Even though it's indistinguishable, you can be like, oh, no, actually, I hate this. Get it out of my ears because it's making me feel things, but I know it's not real or something like that.
Yeah, I agree with that. And so I guess where I wanted to go with that was, if that's true, this desire for authenticity being very important, there may be some jobs that are just impossible for AI to take over.
Yeah.
Because so long as AI doesn't actually end up walking around like if AI ends up walking around like robots among humans, then you can actually have a song from the AI being like fuck, and you can be like, yeah, actually him and I are both walking around anthropically.
Okay. Yeah.
Actually, maybe I kind of do get where this guy's coming from.
Yeah. If you bring the robots into the human condition, basically.
Yes.
Like if you then. Okay, I think
so they actually have things to complain about, and then they write music about those things.
If this is going to actually, I think people will reject this. Like a lot of modern people will say that doesn't sound possible. Like you could never have an AI or whatever. But yeah, I think that it's like architecturally possible. We get back to the discussion at the start about the proof of concept being that humans are. Well, this is a modern conception of them in terms of like history, but humans are like some very complex biological mechanism. Why couldn't you also have a mechanism, and the main counterpoint that I'm aware of to this is that there has to be, you have to posit that there's something special about the human that is not reducible just to the biology. But yeah, it's a question of whether we're going to go in that direction. And some people might say, if we go in that direction, why? We've got humans, we could just make more humans. The problem is, if you do it with AIs, either you make them better and then they take over basically, and what they do determines the future, and you have to be like willing to accept that. Or you don't make them better, and then why you just...
What was the point?
Yeah,
may as well have more kids.
Have more kids, that's right. Yeah, we need to provide for them different... Like, we don't know how to make the robots thing go well, but we know pretty much how to make the human thing go well, because we've got a lot of cultural experience with it. So, yeah.
There are people who are big on just people having more kids. Brian Kaplan has a book called Selfish Reasons to Have More Kids, which I've just ordered actually.
What do you expect to read in it? Selfish Reasons to Have More Kids.
He's making arguments. This is a digression, but it's one worth taking. So he's making the argument that like parenting's become harder, but it actually doesn't need to be hard, and people have chosen not to have children based on like surveys, like psychological surveys, saying that your quality of life goes down after you have kids. And they're like, well, I'm a scientist and I care about the data, so I'm not going to have kids. But it's like, he's basically saying like, you'll be surprised how little of an impact your parenting has on the long-term prospects of your child. And so given that fact, you can just relax, just have the kids, chill out, stop trying to be such a good parent who's taking them to tennis lessons and stuff like that. Just relax and they'll be fine. Because this comes back to the whole nature versus nurture thing.
Yeah.
He's kind of saying that it's mostly nature, right? There's twin studies where you have twins separated at birth and they both become almost identical people, similar success levels, and you can have adoptive siblings where they go in very different paths, even if they had the same upbringing and the same education.
Okay, interesting.
So that was very, yes. What's the point of that digression again?
We were talking about like cultural...
Having more kids versus having more AIs.
Yeah.
Like, what's the point of having more AIs if you're going to try and kind of lobotomize them for the sake of safety? You may as well just not even bother. Just have kids instead.
And you might not even succeed. Like, they might take over the world and kill everyone, right?
Yes.
Lead to very bad outcome. It might go horribly wrong. We don't know what's going to happen, but we know what's going to happen. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Just use kids. I mean, it's not all perfect, but at least, like, we're not all...
we're still alive. We've been doing kids for a long time. So far, so good.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So on the topic of, like, the end game, where AI exists... the value of human labor has gone to zero. It's not that you just have a few, former taxi drivers or knowledge workers out of the job. Everyone's out of the job.
Everyone biological,
Except maybe for people who somehow get money because they're really attractive. Like maybe makeup tutorials will still be a thing where people are like influencers and stuff like that because they've got the fleshy human skin.
If you can't simulate that, like generate the video, right?
Exactly, which we probably can do, but again, it comes back to authenticity, right? There might be a number of jobs where authenticity matters.
Yeah. So it's the people that are left, they have to have economic power to be able to purchase authenticity, right? So if everyone gets knocked off the current kind of, basically humans compared to all the other animals in the world, humans are in charge, and we then allocate power within the sort of population. Mostly economically, there's also cultural elements and like dominance hierarchies socially as well. But if we were knocked from that pedestal, and completely knocked from that pedestal, then if we want authenticity, it doesn't matter, because if a monkey wants a banana, it's like our choice whether it gets the banana, if it's in captivity, that is. A wild monkey is different. So yeah, I mean, we could have our own like little economy in the shadows, like that is still playing at the human level, potentially. But yeah, it's a question of whether or not we retain some power in the new world order, kind of thing. I guess people will have, every incentive to set it up that way, and it's like a failure if it doesn't.
So I think maybe the direction I was thinking more was less about let's assume that we're safe. And we're not being screwed over.
So we've built some system where it's still, it still values enough of what we value that we get some of it or something.
Yeah, like we don't need to work to eat food or whatever.
One vision is, I think it's called full-scale luxury communism or something like that.
That's basically what I'm thinking of.
Basically, everyone has like just a completely luxurious lifestyle. No one has to do any of the drudging work to make it happen, because that's all automated, and we have AI servants, we have whatever. Another option is sort of like virtual paradises for everyone, like your own one, or it can be connected with other people if you wished, or maybe you wouldn't be able to tell the difference because there are other simulated people in your virtual world.
That second option sounds super cool, but let's go with the luxury communism one. So that sounds like one of those things where we'll get what we want, but not what we want to want. Wait, no, we get what we want, what we think we want, but not what we actually want. And
is that because you think, if you take all the problems out of a human's way, they have nothing to kind of...
No, I think that it's that... I think they'll still have problems, but there'll be problems that won't be as easily remedied. So the problem is, I want to have status.
Okay. So positional goods.
Yeah, positional goods, right? So how does an AI system support for that? Because right now, let's say maybe coincidentally, the same thing that puts food on the table also gives us positional goods.
Yeah.
So if I'm a very, very good person at my work, I get status for that, I get street cred, I feel good when I achieve some goal, I hit some deadline on time, whatever. And if I don't have any work, I really don't have much responsibility. And responsibility and meaning are two, they're kind of intertwined. So then you could think, okay, so you don't have work, whatever. Maybe there's other things where you can get positional goods, and there's other things where you can have responsibilities, right? Let's say raising children is still a responsibility. You could wonder whether AI might just do it all for you and just
Yeah.
become like a nanny that makes it really super easy for you.
Yeah.
Maybe you're playing video games where there's no AIs allowed and you're getting positional. People already do this, right?
Okay.
You play Counter-Strike, you're pretty good at it, you feel good about that.
On the other hand, Lee Sedol quit Go after he was defeated by the AIs. He sort of
Yeah, but everyone already knows that. Like, you already could put a bot in Counter-Strike and it could just destroy everyone because it's just like, just shooting through walls and
okay.
stuff
Maybe
like
some
that.
people were happy with that, to play in their own league. But I am just saying that there's also part of it, which at least for some of these people, for Lee Sedol, was evidently that he couldn't be the best player in the universe of his time.
Right. He was going for the universal
Yeah.
best, not human best.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, and I think it's. I think that the typical human will probably be fine to just be in a realm of other humans and not worry too much about whether they're the best of the best of the world, of the whole universe.
Yeah, I think that's compatible with sort of psychology, especially if you don't know a lot about what's outside, and you don't have anything to compare. You can just sort of focus on your own life, right? It's easy to get sort of the good feels of kind of dominating a particular little game if you don't focus on the fact that you're just a tiny little pond and there's bigger ponds out there and stuff like that.
Yes. And so but I do worry that there's not enough. So I worry that even modern day, even in the modern day, people play video games a lot. I don't think that's something that they feel super good about on reflection. I don't know if that's because there's this bigger game they could be playing about progressing their career, getting some money so they can start a family and stuff like that, and get a house, for example. It could be that if you removed the bigger game because that was all taken care of, then the smaller game of video games is perceived to be larger, and now you actually just don't mind playing video games all the time, and that's just rewarding to you. But I do worry about if the set of domains in which you can get positional goods becomes kind of bad, in the sense that you might join a gang or something, and maybe violence is a way. There used to be a lot of violence, and there wasn't a whole lot of economic mobility, right? And I wonder if once you remove economic mobility, you get violence back, because the way to get status is just to, I don't know, be violent against other people.
Presumably the AIs that are in charge would stamp that out, though, right? It'd be like being in a really heavily policed place and then not having economic mobility.
But then you
don't have the option to go violent.
And that could be even worse, maybe.
Potentially, yeah.
Right, where you're just what the fuck? I have this desire to get status, but I literally can't do anything. I can play video games.
So a lot of people think autonomy, which is, I think what you're pointing to that is missing from this scenario, autonomy is something that people find a lot of value in as humans.
My definition of autonomy is being able to do what you want. I'm thinking more about, because let's say you can do what you want in the sense of so you'd have less autonomy if you can't be violent. But the desire to get positional goods, I wouldn't class that as autonomy.
Okay.
That's just because you can eat ice cream, but it's positional autonomy is you want things from other people. You want people to give you recognition and status, and no matter how luxurious your life is, you can't get that for free. You just have to earn it somehow.
Yeah.
And if there's no really good way to earn that, then I don't even know how to think about a society like that. It doesn't sound like a good society to me.
Yeah. Well, if you view this kind of striving for something, in your case it's these positional status things that you kind of biologically engineered to sort of be steering towards, and if you're in a situation where you're continually frustrated, whatever you want to strive towards, I think that would be maybe the issue, or an issue with that scenario, is that seems to be something that humans, to the extent that you can say we have a purpose, we obviously have some things that we're engineered to do, and maybe this is one of them, and if that is kind of frustrated, then that would be, I guess, psychologically very troubling for us, maybe. I wonder if you could grow up in a culture that sort of accepted this and be at peace with it, and not have it send you insane and depressed, but I'm not sure.
I doubt that. I think it's a personality based thing. I think some people just have an insatiable desire for like progression, like maybe the ambition or whatever. I think you genetically in your whole family, from the 3 Farrugia males I've encountered, I think you all have that. I think I have that. I think my brother has it, and a lot of people I know just have that. And thank God for us, because we have the means in the current society to actually progress in some way.
You mean thank God on our behalf? Yeah. Okay. Cool.
Yes. Thank God. Not thank God. Thank God the world has us.
No.
Thank God, for our sake.
Yes.
We actually can do something about that. I often worry about like people who have the same inbuilt desire that I have for progression, if they're just stuck in retail or something, and it's like how painful that must be to them. Maybe it's something that they get over, but I doubt it. I reckon that those people find other avenues to get their fill, and I think that most of them are unhealthy. And I can give an example, like a lot of people who, like young people especially, who don't have much going for them will become like the best drug taker in the group, and they'll be like, I can tank so many bongs and I can do the most MD out of this whole group.
Yeah.
That's 100% a thing I have witnessed firsthand, physically seeing it in front of me. And there's even things like Lungs of Steel. It's like a Facebook group that I don't know if it still exists, but people just like smoking weed, like just insane amounts of weed, competitively.
Yeah.
It's like competitive drug taking, competitive brain damage, basically.
Yeah. Okay.
And that stuff worries me, because I just wonder how many of those kind of like maladaptive dominance hierarchies are there, where it's like, you know, work sucks for a lot of people. Maybe for the majority of people. It may be most people's lives will be better without work, but there are people who need to climb a hierarchy, I think, and they're going to be in trouble.
So you give them like Olympic Games, you know, sports, like some sports could become, as in human sports, like, because obviously, I mean, the thing with games is that you suspend so you agree to adopt certain final goals. Obviously, they're not truly final, but you sort of everyone kind of agrees that for a time we're going to pursue this thing, and so you can still do that. You can make up goals to pursue, even if all of your true final goals are taken care of. And to some extent, I think that's what sport is about, or games are about. And so sport is like a very physical, embodied version of that, where people come together. And I think maybe you're pointing at something earlier when you were talking about games and being competitive like this. Yeah, maybe this could be a solution where it doesn't matter that there are AIs that could do this differently. I mean, you can also ride a bicycle much faster than anyone can run, but we still have running races, and not to mention all of the other, you know, modes of locomotion that are much faster than a bicycle. But you could still have some kind of meaning derived from accepting a temporary purpose, and being good at doing that, or something like that.
Well, I think we already do that with work anyway. Like, you know, most people, even if you like your job, it's kind of hard and annoying, and there's a bunch of things that you might do in a given 8-hour workday that you just don't want to do that much. But the question is, could I play sports 8 hours a day? Or could I play sports 4 hours a day, and then the remaining hours I read books and watch TV? Like, it's not obvious to me. Something seems missing.
Well, there are professional athletes, right? And they don't. It depends on when you say play sports 8 hours a day or whatever. They're not like competing 8 hours a day. They're mostly training, right?
That's true.
So they're kind of trying to sculpt their body into like an ideal form that they have in their mind, or something like that.
Yeah,
or
but
trying to sculpt themselves into like an engine for pursuing this particular end that they understand has, like, you know, if we enter a dystopia, you know, the fact that they can run like 100 meters 1 second faster than someone else, you know, it's going to have some value if they're running away from something, but it's not going to have the same kind of value as, you know, being able to competently gather, like, do hunter-gatherer stuff would in like the ancestral environment or something like that. It's not,
and I'm okay with that. I would even say that modern day work can often be removed from obvious good things, right? You could, like, I can write code where I'm like, I'm pretty proud of this code, but it might be for some really boring system that's actually not really that relevant to anything, and that doesn't bother me.
Okay.
I'm just like, I'm interested in the intrinsic structure of things, and I'm not as concerned
It's
about
like an aesthetic thing, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So a lot of people that I talk to who are in sort of research mathematics, or students who are kind of heading this way, have this kind of, they would respond to this answer with like, oh, at least we can contemplate beauty, like the sort of structure of the universe, and that's so elegant, and I can get so much value from it.
Yeah.
And so maybe there would be, people would find value from contemplating art. But I personally am not sure if that kind of thing is like a, like an acceptation, I'm not sure exactly what it was, but like the analogy is to sugar in the ancestral environment being very scarce and valuable. So we learn to prize it very highly, but now that it's abundant, that becomes a problem for us.
Yes.
And we value it more than we should. So it's a question of whether or not this kind of pursuit of beauty, for example, is like chasing like a sugar high.
Well,
like that.
I'm not even so concerned about beauty.
Some people might be. I'm not saying that you are.
True. But I suppose what I want to say is that even so one of the things people often say when it comes to hypothesizing about this future utopia is we can all go and enjoy art and read books and create things and blah 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 blah. But they forget that most people don't do those things and don't want to do those things.
Okay, so there's a easy way to explain why a lot of people don't do those things is because it's not a way to provide for yourself and like survive in the society.
No, I'm saying they've got no interest in it personality-wise.
But if they didn't have to work, what would they do, kind of thing?
So some
people, maybe not everyone, but some people would, maybe more people would.
We have to be more people would do it than otherwise. Yeah. But I think that...
Okay, your point is just that a lot of people don't.
A lot of people who make these claims are themselves special people. They're creative people who love art and all that stuff. And they just assume that the whole world, that in every person there's this person yearning for art and all that stuff. When in reality, I think most people just don't. And they're they're less open. You know how there's like openness is a personality trait?
Mm-hmm. I wonder if it's... that's interesting. I wonder if someone would say that's like you can learn to do that. You can learn to appreciate these things, and it's because you're not cultured that you like don't value these things.
Maybe.
You brought out openness and obviously
sounds like imperialism to me. Yeah, like
oh yeah, sure. No, I mean it's definitely imperialism of like the like the liberal education types, which are currently, as far as I can tell, losing the battle comprehensively against more pragmatic and work oriented.
Some people just really pragmatists. Like you come across them where they just have no interest in a bunch of things that I might be interested in, but they're still intelligent people who are like they're goal oriented. They want to solve problems, and that's all they want to do. Yeah. And I worry about a world where there's no problems to solve because of people like that.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. Yeah. I do think they would have a hard time unless we put them in. I mean, you can even. It depends on whether you're okay with them being real problems, and we've already discussed games to some extent. I think you could probably design a world where everyone has problems that are responsible for solving, like puzzle games, for example, where you kind of have a curriculum that you kind of, you learn new things and you sort of like solve new puzzles and stuff. Imagine the equivalent of, is it Jonathan Blow who makes the Braid and stuff, and he also made The Witness? Yeah. So, an AI Jonathan Blow who makes like an infinite The Witness game, but better. I mean, not everyone likes that game. I don't know, but something that then you could start playing and it could become your life purpose to get as far as you can in this game, and that becomes. And this sort of gets back to the sort of metaverse topic that I was talking about before. You sort of, because simulation might be a big part of this, or I guess it doesn't have to be. You could create these structures in the world and have them somewhere if you can afford to dedicate the space to that. In the sort of mastermind AI's utility function, or maybe it's like I can afford to run you a simulation using like enough cores to like have this be indistinguishable for you from reality, but I can't afford like the physical space. That server takes up like this much room. Anyway, so maybe you can create a kind of treadmill, literally, for people to run on, and then they get value from making progress on that treadmill, even though it's just a treadmill at the end of the day.
Yeah, I suppose.
I don't think many people are very optimistic about like this. This scenario sounds off to a lot of people. Like they say, come on. But what about real goals? Like, it's got to be.
Yeah.
But then we're in trouble because, we're trying to solve all the problems. We're trying to become immortal. Like, I mean, this is medicine, like, as a field, is like trying to refuse death. Death is inevitable, but like trying to prolong it as long as possible. There's arguments that, death gives meaning to life. So like, and it's inevitable, it turns out, like, unless we can actually solve immortality. But if we solved immortality, maybe there'd be less meaning. I don't know. I haven't. Yeah.
Like, I think medicine, we can make a lot of progress. A lot of things are just fucking annoying. Like, eczema. Does that give meaning to anybody? I doubt it.
It's possible. I mean, it could give meaning to the doctors who are trying to solve it. But
that's a really good point. But so something I wanted to say about the idea about like competition, right? Competition seems to be an endless source of meaning for humans.
This is well, not necessarily all humans, but
many humans.
Possibly
many humans.
Some. Yeah.
Yes. Again, personality traits.
And maybe it's not the only source of even those people. Maybe it's not all they require. So it's like one thing that we could probably sustain.
Yes.
But it might not be. It might not be everything we need for those people, and it might not be what a lot of people want.
Yeah, I agree with that. But for those who are competitive people who want to compete, I do worry as well about like, apparently back in the day when the Olympics first kind of happened, it was like kind of amateur.
As in ancient Greece Olympics, or
not that far back.
Olympics?
Probably also that far back, but
okay.
Let's talk about 200, 300 years ago.
Okay.
The rule was you weren't allowed to be a professional athlete.
Oh, okay.
It had to be amateur.
So it was literally amateur.
Yeah. And you could just like rock up and see how you did.
Huh.
Over time, of course, there was more money involved, and like all things, the stakes get higher and higher, and then people really just become professionals and spend all their time being good athletes so they can go to the Olympics every 4 years and try and make some money. And I worry about a world where, you can imagine that if nobody had to work, that there'd be a lot more people in the pool who might want to say, hey, you know what, I've got the time to become an Olympic athlete, and I'm going to try and compete in that. And it drives up the waterline such that it just becomes a lot harder. And
to be the best.
To be the best.
Yeah. I mean, even today, they're like, even though there's the Olympics, there's also local sports.
So yes, that's the question. Is would it be localized? I worry about. So in terms of creative stuff, it's just not localized. I'm not going to my local.
Oh, okay, yeah. This is the Sorry, go ahead.
This is like the Pareto principle where, like, it's a winner take all situation in creative things where you have a couple people who live in America make fucking amazing music, and I listen to only them.
But there's a countercultural thing where people would be like, oh, I listen to this, is so underground, like it's a local thing, you haven't heard it, right? Or you don't think that's big enough?
No, even my friends, like my more musically inclined friends, are never recommending me bands that are like nearby.
Okay,
it might be
they're mostly
indie.
Not very good. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Most of them are just not that good. And so it is true that with sports, we do have local sports things, and that's a good thing. I think we can expect that to continue.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe it's hard to talk about the creative side because AI is now also competing, so that also makes it hard.
Not a lot of people necessarily watch the local sports games. It's certainly not as many as people like go to the grand final in Melbourne every year, right? For Australian footy. So
that's true.
But the people who are playing are still getting meaning from it. So could you still create music and find that a meaningful pursuit, even if no one was really listening to it?
That's a good question.
Or only like your best friend and your parents or something like that, which is the same as local football teams.
That's
like
a good
the
question.
Parents should rock up.
I hope so. There's a good chance you actually can. Like, my friend Dom this morning linked me some songs he's made on SoundCloud that sound fantastic. And I say that they sound fantastic, and then he probably feels good about that. Everyone who makes music still has the thing at the back of the head being like, I could make it. I could get to the big leagues, and then that'd be really good. If they didn't have that, maybe it wouldn't make a big difference. Maybe it'd still be okay to just have your parents and your friends tell you that it's fantastic, or just a very small number of people. But I do worry about, in winner-take-all situations, if you just have a large pool of people that are now competing, life just gets harder. Like, I used to play more video games than I do currently. I rarely play video games these days. But
video games allow you to play with anyone in the world, right? So you become in the big league, and probably near the bottom of it for almost everyone, right?
Like when I used to play Counter-Strike or Age of Mythology with like you and our friends in high school, it was awesome because I was like actually could hold my own weight, and
I couldn't.
Well, you were pretty good at Age of Mythology.
I don't remember being any good at it, but yeah, anyway.
You were pretty good on those Highland maps.
Okay.
But
it was fun anyway.
It was fun, and it wasn't like anyone super duper sucked.
Yeah.
Whereas nowadays, I'll play a video game with my friends, and often it's a game I'm not super familiar with, like maybe Counter-Strike Go. I don't spend much time on it. I get my ass kicked.
Yeah, and it's not fun.
And we're playing ranked, so maybe that's part of the issue.
What's ranked?
Ranked is just when you actually are given a ranking. So there's like a casual pool and the rank pool.
Okay.
And when you're
like
playing,
an ELO score kind of thing, or
yeah, exactly. There's an ELO score. You're up against people at the same ranking, and so you kind of get assigned.
So are you playing with friends as well?
I'm in a group of 5 people.
Oh,
a team of 5
right.
versus a team of 5.
Got it.
And I get my ass kicked, and I feel like an idiot. And I'm like, maybe if I spent a lot more time on this, I could get better.
Yeah. And
not feel like such a loser. But I'm not going to do that because why the fuck would I do that? Like, I've got other things that I find meaningful that actually earn me money.
Yeah.
And I just worry about, like, if the entire world now has all the time in the world to get really good at Counter-Strike Go, is it even going to be fun to be playing a game where it's just like you just instantly die whenever you make a single mistake?
Does that just mean your ELO score is too high? Like that you're supposed to be, or your team, you're like letting your team down?
My team is carrying me. So my ELO score, if I was actually versing other people at the same ELO score, maybe I'd be
that's what ELO does, right? If you go on chess.com and like initially you get like your ass handed to you and you get bounced around a bit with your ELO, you go like too low and then too high, but eventually calibrates, and then you can focus on kind of slowly improving it against people that are roughly the same level.
I guess the question is
if you did join a team that was of roughly a similar skill, or like you worked well together, or you started with that team and you guys kind of developed together, you could potentially find more. So it might just be that you're like
I might
playing
be
against the
mismatched
wrong
right
people.
now.
Yeah.
At the same time though, okay, that may be the case. But let's imagine now everyone's got loads of free time, so everyone's playing games and the ELO's going up.
Everyone competitive, yeah.
Everyone's really competitive. I guess any new person, if you're versing the whole world, you have to be able to verse other people at the same ELO as you. In the same way as you need juniors to become seniors. That's not a huge concern.
Start to have comparisons between like your life ELO timeline and like the greats or something like that.
Yeah.
Like, who is
You're
not
crying. It's like Julius Caesar crying because Alexander the Great had already conquered like a bunch of places by the same age.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just worry about when it's like Slack is a concept that Les Wrong talks about a lot, where it's like when there's
not familiar actually.
Really? So when there's fierce competition, you have less slack, and when you have less slack, you just can't. You're kind of have less freedom to just enjoy yourself.
Okay.
It's like I used to play Age of Mythology, and you would just fuck around a bit and build walls you didn't need to build and stuff like that. But once you get to the upper echelons, it's less fun, and it's more you're just satisfying a goal that you have.
Right. This is an alignment problem because the objective of this game is win, and that does not accommodate for have fun.
That's right, entirely. And in the lower levels, you've got more room for fun because
you can sort of force some fun in and still win and like get a reward, right?
Yeah. You've got more freedom.
But someone at the top, unless they're also equally like deviating from the win like imperative, and they're like,
as a joke,
I built some walls. That's just how we play. You build some walls. It'll just cancel out, and we'll like have a good competition. But if someone is like more single-mindedly pursuing the goal than you are, then there's no room for you to do that.
Yes. And
unless you're way better than them and then you just play with them. Yeah.
Yes. It's similar with like I guess sports, right? Like if you wanted to join the Olympics in a world where literally anybody now has the time to join the Olympics, right? You just have a huge pool of people and it is winner take all, then you might need to put your body through some just bad. You might actually be a health risk. In fact, I think even modern day professional Olympic stuff, people say it's not super healthy what they're doing. Like
not to mention the kind of like, you could call it, so specification gaming or reward gaming is a problem that comes up in AI alignment where you're worried about the AI system solving the puzzle in a way that you didn't intend, or like doing the task in a way you didn't intend. An example is there was this AI that was trained with reinforcement learning to to have a boat race around like a water track in this virtual game, and they said, you know, collect as many points as possible, because along the track you've got these sort of like little tokens, like kind of coins or something. They're little cubes that are rotating and stuff, and you collect those, you get points, and they kind of spawn in front of you. So you would think that this incentivizes you to go around the track, and that's what people intended, was for this agent to become very good at going around the track. What it did instead was it found there's a little like glitch in the game where it's not necessarily a glitch, it's just the way the game is, where you sort of do like a donut in the boat around and around, and you come around just in time for the thing to respawn again behind you, and you pick it up again. And so it just sits there going in a circle, doing a donut, collecting this thing, and makes no progress in the race. So it has achieved the specification of get as many points as possible, but it is not in the way that you intended. So it's called specification gaming. Specification gaming. So
that's a problem that sports have to deal with a lot.
Yeah. So I was going to say, like any sort of performance enhancing drugs are a way of, you know, there's like a way that is condoned that you're meant to pursue this sport and this excellence by naturally enhancing your body to be the best version of a running machine or a whatever sporting machine it is, swimming or whatever. So, but then people kind of cheat, and they are like pursuing the goal. It's just that they're doing it in a way that wasn't kind of intended.
It's against the spirit.
Yeah, the spirit.
Of the law,
so the
basically.
Spirit of the game, the spirit of the rules is something like what was intended, and the rules themselves are, okay, most of the time performance enhancing drugs are explicitly outruled, but you like what's really effectively outruled is getting caught using them and stuff. So you can try and like find little pathways around it, which would be like the specification gaming. So you're going against the spirit, but not necessarily against the actual embodied or sort of revealed rules of the game. Yeah,
and there's also just the problem of health concerns. Like, you know, if you want to be like a serious weightlifter, it will do damage to your spine.
What is health for? So health is so that you can be like a productive member of society, or like get value out of later in your life. So we're in the regime now where that is no longer a concern. Probably what would happen is the AIs would be competent enough medically that this kind of problem would be known and either outlawed, or it would be known, and if it happened, they would be able to sort of repair it and stuff.
Well, that's interesting.
If your whole life is about becoming a gold medalist in a sport, then if I'm not saying that is, but like if that is taken to be the final goal, then it's worth putting yourself through like physical deterioration in order to do that.
I suppose what I worry about is that in modern day society, maybe not modern day, but maybe recent times, you didn't have to choose. You could set a goal, and it wouldn't be at the expense of your health. And
that would be an ideal social contract, right? Is that you can not have to give too much of yourself.
Yeah.
You can still have some kind of reliance. I don't know. Maybe it's also sometimes there's like a people say, well, you know, I need to stay fit because if I am ever in a situation where I need to rely on that, it would be good to have it. And it's a bit like prepping, right? Where you try and robustify your life so that you have no dependence on society, so that if society collapses, which maybe some of these preppers think is like imminent, you are then able to survive. So sometimes you have certain things about you as a person that like enable you to be independent, and you don't want to give too many of those away because that kind of weakens your position in the contract, so that if society stops holding up its end, you're able to like continue to survive or something like that. I don't know, that was a little bit of a vague, broad answer to response to what you were talking about, but yeah.
But I think we are in agreement that it's going to be it's an open question as to whether this luxurious communist paradise is going to be much of a paradise.
Yes. And
whether it's the positional goods people want, and whether actually it just makes it a lot harder to get those, compared to if we're kind of all working 8 hours a day. I'd love to be wrong about that. I'd love to find out that actually within my lifetime I can just, because I think about it all the time, like, man, I want to just like go and work on LaserGit full time, and but it won't make me any money. So it's making me some money, but not enough money.
Yeah. Okay.
And
so this is you're facing the Well, I mean, the charitable version of this is that society is saying, "Come on, Jesse, you got to pull your weight. You got to do something that the market will reward enough."
Yes,
that's the baseline. And then,
to be honest, people complain about that.
Yeah,
but when you really think about what it is, it's that the purpose of prices is to communicate the value people hold in something.
Yeah.
So, I could go off and make a bunch of music that's great for me, but it gives absolutely no value to anyone else because they don't like my music.
And our society has invested a lot in you as a person, as an end in yourself to some extent, but it only functions when everyone gives back a baseline amount.
Yes.
And so that's the charitable steelman case for capitalism. Right?
Basically, and obviously the issue is things that earn you money aren't necessarily good because of the mismatch between what people want and what they want to want.
It's more generally, I think it's basically externalities, right? Things that aren't priced in.
Yeah, that's true. Externalities also. Yes. I'm thinking about people who work at Facebook. Are you making anyone's lives that much better?
Certainly making a lot of money. So yes.
Must be, right? Because advertisers are loving their lives.
Right. Advertising. Oh man, I just feel like there's something very wrong about advertising, and I can't figure out how to design the world without advertising, because it's where does advertising start compared to just you and me talking about something and me recommending something to you.
I was actually wondering yesterday, I was thinking, could you have a household where there was no advertisements? Where you just had a rule. It's if you do not bring something into this house where there's an advertisement, which means no newspaper.
The equivalent of veganism, but for advertising or something like that.
Yeah, so your informational diet is restricted.
Yeah.
And obviously you're allowed to have, if your jar of Vegemite is advertising Vegemite by saying how good it would be in this recipe, that's fine. I'm talking about anything else. It's an advertisement that shows up.
Yeah.
It's similar to there's places where what country is it? There's a country that banned billboard advertising.
Oh yeah, okay.
But they
sounds like a cool move.
Yeah, and it sounds like a fucking fantastic idea. And obviously, if you're at a shop is advertising itself because it has to have a sign saying this is the shop that I am.
Right.
So there's kind of I feel like that's kind of something where if you wanted to get rid of that, it just becomes hard to live in the world.
No, so
is this Vegemite or is this Nutella?
I think the problem with advertising is more it's it's when it's exploitative. So the sort of charitable case for advertising is that prices, it's kind of serving an information need. These people would be better off if they knew about this great thing that I have, like Vegemite. Isn't it it would make your life so much better? The problem is when people are doing it for their own money rather than for the actual benefit of the end consumer. So it's something you're treating the consumer as a means to get your money and not as an end in themselves. You actually want to make their life better, right? So if the world was more like this, it's people who advertise Vegemite would say, not everyone likes this, but we think you should try it because you might. And if you do, it can become a really important part of your life and you can derive a lot of value for it. But not everyone, and we're okay with that. We don't need everyone to like Vegemite. I don't like Vegemite personally.
I feel like my concern's more about when you're advertising something that's addictive. Because who cares if someone oversells Vegemite? Because I'll have Vegemite one time and be like, oh, that wasn't that good.
Yeah, you can't advertise cigarettes, right? So there's regulations against that.
That's right. But you can advertise a bunch of shit like
Facebook,
sugar, anything with sugar in it.
Yeah. There's restrictions on that actually for children, right? I don't believe children's television programs are allowed to have advertisements where they market junk food.
Right. So that's good. I think that's good. But those are most of the things I worry about. Is people who the addiction stuff. It doesn't bother me if ads are using hyperbole.
But isn't the addiction stuff is because that they're not being honest. If an honest ad for something addictive would be this is going to ruin your life, try it. Right.
The problem is that so think about M&Ms, right?
Okay.
Plenty of people can just eat M&Ms once every now and then and go, that was great. Yeah. That tasted really good. I was watching a movie. Value from that. I got some value from that. But there's just people who can't do that and they are just a slave to their sugary cravings.
Okay.
And
I identify somewhat with this slave.
I also do, but I've had less sugar recently, so I'm living the life of the person who's not super involved with sugar, but I'm aware that I had almost my
Yeah,
entire
yeah,
life
So-
up to uni age was me just eating a bunch of sugar.
So it's like if it's there, you wouldn't be able to stop yourself. I mean, this is me. I wouldn't be able to stop myself. So my strategy is don't bring it into the house, kind of
Exactly.
thing. Yeah, and I can get on it then, and I know that like I will make the wrong choice. That I mean, this is like there's different versions of me, right? There's the version in the moment, and the sophisticated thing I think to do is to anticipate that and then avoid that situation where I will make the wrong choice.
Yes.
And a version of me that is like my ideal self or something is like dominating in that like arrangement my like impulsive self.
Yeah, so
but I'm cool with that because most of the time that's who's in charge. So
yeah, so the advertisements that we don't want are the ones that are speaking to your lesser self.
Okay,
the
yeah,
one
yeah,
that
yeah.
you would rather not be in control.
Interesting. Yeah.
And you could argue it's paternalism to try and stop that
Yes.
from happening, because maybe sometimes people want to be fat pieces of shit who are eating M&Ms or whatever it is, right? People just sometimes that's fine, and I do have a general aversion to imposing kind of like global restrictions on things out of paternalism, but
maybe we got the balance wrong.
Yeah, like, but again, I don't. It comes back to the whole like supply versus demand. Like, maybe people just want to eat chocolate, and even if you were like not that good at advertising it, let's say that you had a rule that like you couldn't even advertise that much, it might be that the rate of chocolate consumption wouldn't even change.
Well, yeah, interesting. It's hard to define advertising, obviously. Like when you're walking through the supermarket and the chocolate is at eye height.
That's what I was just thinking. Is that advertising?
It's like a nudge, right? That would be the economic language for it.
It is so annoying when you see that stuff in the checkout section.
Yeah.
It's so blatant. It's same with the magazines there about the royal family. I don't know why the fuck anyone cared about the royal family in Australia.
I don't see these things. I mean, maybe it's because the self-checkouts don't have as much of it.
No, they
right?
do. Well, at least the one that I do, every time I go to the self-checkout, not only is that, first of all, I think they're actually literally right there with you. At the very least, there is magazines there.
Okay, yes. No, I think the way they've got it, because I remember walking through a checkout where you have to line up and use the sort of like, what's it called? Like the travelator thingy, the conveyor belt that brings your groceries up to the person.
That thing.
Yeah, they're right on top of that. Right, so there's shelves on top of the little conveyor belt, and you're waiting in line. You're standing there, and you're like, "Oh, it's right there. I could just put it on the conveyor belt." But when it's the self checkout in the shops near me, I walk like there is a shelf with all of the goodies, and magazines, but it's like where I'm not waiting for long, because normally I just walk straight in and go to a free checkout thing. So what they should do is they should make people have to wait longer. That's how they would drive more sales.
That's a good idea. That is where you notice it. Like if you're waiting because
some shops have this.
It's
they have like
up.
some shops have like extended sort of lines
Yes.
leading to the checkout, and they pack these with those impulse products.
Which is just so. I'm at Officeworks. I'm going to get M&Ms. Are you fucking kidding me? Like
Officeworks, it's just, some of their stuff is like stationery and like digital things. Like,
Yeah.
just pick up an extra
What the
USB-C.
fuck, dude. Like that's the kind of shit where, again, it's not. Well, yeah, it's catering to our lesser selves.
Okay.
And so I don't like that.
This wouldn't stand. So the market would get rid of this stuff if people were like outraged about it more.
Do you reckon?
Yeah, I mean, so you can't get away in the same way that a company can't get away with like blatantly doing things that are like politically disagreeable, like being racist or something like that. I think that if people felt as seriously, as passionately about this kind of ideal self versus impulsive self,
Right.
then they would. But I mean, obviously they don't. Like, so
I agree.
I guess we're in an equilibrium at the moment where culture is kind of happy with this. But I guess an old school like moralist, like paternalist would be like, you know what, we just need to improve the moral caliber or something of society, get them to the point where they realize that this is, they have more self-control and stuff, and then they will just either completely ignore this stuff or they will demand that it is removed if they find that they are unable to control themselves.
Yeah, it's interesting because like with the related videos, so I'm not really in the self-serve checkout or wherever it is, I'm not buying the chocolate, and I'm proud of that fact.
Yeah.
Maybe once upon a time I would have.
I didn't even see it. Yeah.
But I do know with like YouTube related videos, that got me good.
Okay.
But that was a while ago, and my solution to that was, and it wasn't like QAnon flat earth shit. Just
spending a little bit more time than you would have reflectively endorsed.
Yeah, there's always this thing where you go to learn something very specific and concrete, like how do I do this really basic, boring thing in Unity, and then the next video is like things I wish I knew when I started my career as a developer, or something like. It's like, fuck
Is that a video
you.
that you've made?
That was a joke though. That was actually a joke.
Okay.
But it was probably reflecting on exactly that issue.
Okay.
But people's like, 10 years of doing this, the wisdom I gained. And there's like the two levels where it's like you trick yourself into think you were here to learn a skill, and now you're learning what some guy says about really broad, airy-fairy things that might be really useful to you.
It's the equivalent of junk food, right? It's like easy passive consumption.
It's more like the equivalent of health food in the health section of Woolies that actually has a lot of sugar in it. Or it's like, it's got some unhealthy stuff in there, it's using artificial sweeteners, and it's like, you tell yourself, a protein bar.
Diet Coke,
as if anyone gets any protein from a protein bar, as opposed to just an actual meal of protein.
To fact check how much protein's in a protein bar. But yeah.
I reckon it's even if it has the amount of protein.
Right.
It's still
chicken. Yeah,
it's sugary. It's a piece of shit. It's probably bad for you. And so, at least most of them are, right? It's like if it tastes good, it's probably bad for you.
Okay.
But that's what's happening is that it's like this like high level shit where it's like, yes, I actually am learning things from this. It's not a makeup tutorial. This isn't flat earth crap. I actually am learning things that relate to my career. It's just that it wasn't what I was looking for, and it's much more tantalizing and easy than going to the part 2 of the Unity tutorial.
Yeah.
And
so
actually
sitting down doing some cognitive work. Yeah.
Yes, actually putting effort in to improve yourself.
You said you solved this.
I solved it using AdBlock element selector, where you can basically just say like, first of all, get AdBlock, but second of all, you can just say, I don't want to see this, I don't want to see this, I don't want to see this. So my YouTube now is like, there is no related videos.
Yeah.
Even when the video ends, it doesn't show you that grid thing afterwards.
Yeah.
It doesn't even show the comments. So I can't view comments because I always regret looking at comments. It's just a bunch of crap. And it won't show me the amount of likes. Anything that reminds me that things other than this video exist in the world is basically not visible.
Yeah.
And I've had that for maybe 2 years now, and it's been really useful to me. And so the reason for me bringing this up was that you were saying, okay, one thing we could do is say, try and increase the moral fiber of society so that people, and it's just like, I don't think I could have done anything to solve that problem other than actually just like blinding myself to it using technology.
Yeah. This is the sophisticated solution where you don't bring the sugar into the house kind of thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know if I could.
I do a similar thing. I use a separate extension actually than AdBlock that is purpose built for tuning these parts of YouTube out on the page. So yeah, I do see the comments, and normally when I scroll down, I'm disappointed. Like, this is a separate aside. I'm normally looking for like. I'm normally like, oh, this video is a little bit shit. I wonder if people have like really ranted about it in the comments. And I scroll down, and YouTube must be very good at like filtering that kind of.
They love the positive shit.
Yeah, so it's normally positive, and then I'm just disappointed I don't look further. But it's a good idea. Maybe I should just get rid of the comments altogether.
Yeah, you gain nothing from looking at comments. I don't think there's ever
going to be anything in there that I'm actually wanted. Sometimes there's a link that people don't put a video description. They put some information in the top comment or something.
That's true.
But yeah. Anyway. Yeah, sorry, go on.
Yeah, so and also I'll quickly mention that even YouTube comments used to be like, they used to be really stupid. And it'd be like, oh, the dislike bar is as big as Justin Bieber's dick, like that kind of shit. Do you remember that? And it was like they used to have like the two top comments, and it was just always some dumb shit.
Oh, maybe a little bit.
But now comments, it's the same deal with like how. Now comments are getting better, but they're still the same people looking for likes. And so it's like, maybe this is me being too harsh. Someone like, I love this song. My dad passed away recently, and everything about that. And it's just like, look, maybe that's true. Maybe your dad did pass away recently, but it's like, why are you telling strangers on the internet if not for likes? Anyway, that's me being very cynical about how people behave. But again, it's about this thing where it's like, it's like it's getting harder and harder to filter out crap because the crap is becoming less crap, and but it's still at the end of the day it's still crap.
So we need like a this is an alignment problem, right? Because the what comes to the top of the comments field is whatever gets the most likes or whatever, but that's not necessarily what it provides the most value to the person reading the comments section.
Yes, but I would even just say that it's just like, why do you even need to get value from the comments section? Like, I actually think the solution is to just on an individual level, I would just say get rid of the comment section
If there was
entirely.
a better comment section, a better comment filtering algorithm, the conclusion would be different. So it's
Hacker
just
News
because
comments are fantastic.
Yeah.
And I'll always read the Hacker
Okay.
News comments more
Right.
so than the actual post, just because the caliber of people is just seems to be high for some reason.
they're probably also like in sync with you more because you're a hacker.
That's a good point. It's probably a very strong correlation there.
Yeah.
But I guess this it keeps coming back to what we were saying with alignment. You know, when you have this utopia in the distant future, it gives us what we want, but it's missing something.
What we asked for, at least. But yeah,
Exactly.
probably what we asked for is missing something. This is the thing. So there's basically we've had a little bit of a conversation today about what is actually of value in, like, by looking at some of these examples and sort of trying to pinpoint what's missing or whatever. The question is, will we get a comprehensive enough specification of what we actually value so that we can put it into these machines? I mean, I think the sort of obvious sort of perspective on this is to say, well, until we are pretty sure that we've got it, let's not put it into the machines. Like, let's not make machines arbitrarily powerful if they're going to bend the universe towards their will, towards whatever design they have, because until we are pretty sure that what we're putting into the machines is what we actually would reflectively want. So that's, I think the AI, that's like the part of that's the core of the alignment problem or something. I mean, there's another part of the alignment problem, which is actually making that stick, making what we decide what we want, we know what we want. Even then, can we make the system actually pursue that, or could there be other things that come up that kind of derail that process? And that's another issue that we haven't really talked much about.
Well, I have no idea how long this has been, but it sounds like it's been a pretty full and fulfilling conversation.
We talked about a lot. We talked about privacy. We talked about AI safety. We talked about AI and then AI safety, and now a little bit of economics and capitalism and stuff.
We've captured a lot of ground. So let's wrap this up. Do you have any things you want to plug for the audience? Like, are you around on socials? Is there some research project you need participants for?
No. Thank you. No, I'm kind of trying to get into working on AI safety more than I currently am, because my work on explainable AI is a little bit different. It's just only tangentially related. So I don't currently have anything to point people to, and I'm not really on socials. So
Respect.
But you can look me up on my website if you want to find out more about me, which is far.in.net.
far.in.net.
Yeah, far.in.net. And so, yeah, that's from my last name, Farrugia, FAR. So anyway, I have a personal academic website. It's very plain, but some of my interests and work is catalogued there. And maybe there'll be more stuff in the future. There's not a whole lot now.
Cool. All right, Matt. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Jesse.
All right. Well, let's make sure that I've actually recorded that. Because if I haven't, that would be really embarrassing.